good old grog to talk you through all this.
15 months with the best comrades on this platform.
Count on me, you're gonna have good old grog to talk you through all this. Two, hello. Check two. Two, check. Hello. Hello, friends. Hello, Sam, aka Fonzonzons. Sam, can you confirm the story? I told the story yesterday about how a woman approached me at the Palestine rally and recognized me and talked about my commentary on the issue. Can you confirm that that happens so people know that I'm not making that up? Please. Someone confirm that I'm not making up that story in this weird self-aggrandizement thing. I'm addicted to Rob's soothing voice. Well, I love to hear that. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Just in case I had any doubters about that story. You thought I was making that up to promote myself. That is really something that happened. It was very surreal. It was very surreal. It's not pathetic. I just wanted to get confirmation so people didn't think I'm blowing smoke up their asses. I would never blow smoke up your ass, chat. Never. Never would I do that. Nii was there and clapped. Strong talk from someone that almost drank a candle. Did you almost drink a candle? Coffee cup in front of me. Also scented candle I just put out. Guess which one I just picked up to drink from. That Lodane, it's true. You're talking a lot of smack for someone that almost drank a candle. Let me say that. And thank you, Terrell Jones, for the 15 months tier 1. 15 months with the best comrades on this platform. Thank you, Terrell Jones. That's very kind of you. And thank you also to Blueberry. 34 months of Prime from Blueberry. Very, very close to that extremely cool and exclusive 36-month Pearl badge. For a moment, time slowed down, and everyone in the room appreciated the moment of all their being before the scene cut to black. That's right. And for some reason, all the sound dropped out, and I had that ringing sound for some reason. I don't know why. That's just that always happens in films and stuff. I don't know why that happened, personally. You ever lick an egg for money on camera? I didn't. I licked that egg for pure love of the game. Okay. I licked that egg for pure love of the game because I like to entertain people. I like to entertain you, the viewer, the listener, the chatter. If that's a crime, if it's a crime to try and lift people's spirits at a time when everyone's material conditions is getting worse, we're all inundated with propaganda. We live in the empire. We're constantly scrolling on our little phone, our little square glass rectangles, images of horror and despair. And excuse me if I'm trying to take people's minds off that for just a few moments and do something fun and entertaining like licking an egg, which was totally fine to do, by the way. Totally okay to do that. New TikTok chef. I'm not on TikTok enough. I go in phases where I try to make an effort to be on TikTok and then I forget about it for months at a time. That could be my new big thing. My new recipe. Licking 2 eggs at the same time, however, is true perversion. You don't want that. That's way too much. That's way too much. I think I did a totally normal amount of egg licking. How's everybody doing? How are you doing? What is up? Talk to me. That was always a really cool way when people answer phones in like TV shows or films. They say, "Talk to me." You know. I always wanted to be one of those guys. Never quite. Yeah, there you go, Sean. Never quite had the swag to pull that off. Just stub my toe. Hate that. Or they're just like, yeah, Russo. You know, you say the name. Hate stubbing the toe, and I have messed up toes as well, so it's extra painful for me. Looking forward to making Lebanese food for dinner. That sounds nice. Love Lebanese food. I think Sup Man is a regular of mine. I always say hello, even when I know the person that's calling. Hello. Ahoy hoy. Isn't that what, like, that when they were inventing the telephone, wasn't that one of the options for what they were trying to popularize? Or was it just like ahoy? Moshi Moshi. That I don't think I could pull off. I'm going, hello. I don't sound like that. Whatever happened to Cocaine Wall Street, bro? That's what I said. Talk to me. You must have missed the beginning of that. That's what launched this whole conversation. My mother always says, "Hello, it's your mother," when she calls me, and it angers me for some reason. Yeah, I know who it is, Mom. I know who it is. We know how to figure that out now. Hello in Arabic is marhaba. Always use star 69. I star 69 you, dude. My grandma used to say, howdy, howdy. That's good. I like that. That's fun. That's fun. Let's put some fun, interesting twists on these. Hello in Canadian. How's she going there? How's she going, eh, bud? Hey, how's she going, eh? Oh. Do you ever do that? How's it hanging? No, I can't say I ever do say that. Just out for a rip, eh? No, I don't ever say how's it hanging. The UN is addressing the Israeli occupation right now. Might be good content. That's probably good to look at, Tampon Taste Tester. It probably is. I did see that Israel just called for the resignation of the is it the president of the UN, because they said that Hamas violence didn't happen in a vacuum. So just like a totally reasonable, non-controversial, factual thing to say. Of course, they're whining and crying about that. I was going to mention how we say hello here, but then Rob specified to find it interesting. I guess that's kind of fun. As they say in Germany as well. Hello in German is hallo, and telephone is telefon. Can't be that hard for an English speaker to learn this language. Yeah, and you just need those big B's. There's only a few different letters, those big B's that makes the S the S sound. Right? I'm halfway there already. Hello? The Lionel Richie version. Did you see the old lady hostage saying they treated her very nicely? Yeah, we're going to be looking at that footage. There's a couple things that we need to look at about that. Did you see the heckler wreck Hill Dog at some human rights BS conference? Yes. I saw a bunch of those clips and I saved them to look at like on the stream. I didn't like watch them. Do you ever do French or Spanish greetings? I can't say that I do. Saying hello in French is just hello. So it's like, it's not really that exciting. And the CNN headline for the story about how the lady was treated well was, it was hell. That's right. They put me through hell. And then you look at like what she was actually saying. She was like, it was kind of nice. Google had an Allo product at one point. I remember that. Yeah. Because they had Google Chat. They just ditched that for no reason to make Hangouts. They did Google Hangouts. And then I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking to you. She's listening to me. She's listening to me. Fuck. No, they had Hangouts, and then they ditched that for some reason to have. They did a chat app and a video chat app. They split it into two for no reason, and then no one used that, and now they're back to just using the original thing that they had like 10 years ago that everyone was fine with. It wasn't Momo, it was Google talking to me. Yeah, they love canceling products for no reason. It's wild how much the money they waste. Just like, let's just reinvent the same product like 5 different times in the 10-year span. Let's do that. We're the world's biggest tech company run by super geniuses. Let's reinvent the same product five times, only to end up right back where we started. Remember Stadia? No, I don't remember Stadia. I remember Wave, though. Wave was kind of cool. Remember Google Wave? That was kind of fun. You could like collaborate and see in real time like what they're typing. Yeah, it's probably, the R&D, a write-off, some kind of tax break. I guess. It just seems like a weird way to run a company. Are you doing an old man yelling at cloud bit? No, I'm just talking about... I don't know how we got on talking about this. I don't remember at all. I do not recall at all. Maybe I am doing... I often do old man yells at cloud segments. What did Orb Lady say? I've just been told Lucid Fox showed his chat your new merch, so you have to make it now. No, I don't think that I don't think that I do, actually. And we don't even need to get into that conversation about what that is. We don't even need to get... No, we don't need to go down that road. Trust me. Trust me on this. I think we're good. I think we're good on that. Yeah, Google ruining search is an interesting choice as well, isn't it? I am not talking to you. Jesus. I can't even talk about this major tech company without this device like yelling at me. She knows that I'm talking about the parent company. So they're listening and they're like, hey, excuse, what is that? Sorry, what? Excuse me? I couldn't help but hear you overhear you saying something there. What was that? I just say she because it's a female voice. I mean, I would probably say he if it was a male voice. Really, I guess it's a they, them. Damn. Anyway. I don't know how we got onto that. You besmirch the future Lord and Master of Earth. Well, that's funny because I always try to be polite. I really do. I always try to be polite to the assistants. I say thank you often. I try to ask them how they're doing sometimes for that exact reason. I want to be part of the favored ones. That's right, Dr. Maggot. That's what the segment is. You're absolutely right. Same thing I did yesterday. I just threw this croissant. I threw this croissant in the air fryer with some Havarti and a couple different kinds of salami. 3 minutes. And the cheese all melted. Very nice. Did you hear them? I doubt the mic picks it up. It's pretty loud. Oh, le croissant. C'est ça. Had a great time watching Misery last night. Was so fun watching Misery. I mean, it was a great time because I really do like the movie, but God, there's some tough to watch. There's some tough to watch scenes in that. Just got here in time to say, Rob, I'm your number one fan. That's the next time someone approaches me in public. That's what it's going to turn into. I just, we do talk, and we should talk about Kathy Bates in that because she's just terrific. It's really, I think it's one of the best performances probably in any movie ever. Like she's so great. But you got to say as well, James Caan in that is, I think he's fantastic. James Caan is like, it's really perfectly cast. They really, the two of them together, it's just magic. He's so great. I was laughing so hard last night at all his faces and expressions. When he's like trying to trying to not upset her and slowly realizing how much of a fucked situation that he's in. He's so great at selling that. I'm surprised they haven't made it into a stage play. It's basically two people talking for 2 hours. Yeah, in a single location. I'm surprised that as well. I'm sure it has been made somewhere. Do you need some new typing paper? A pack of smokes? Ankle massage? Oh. And he kind of figures out how he can manipulate her. I want a croissant sandwich now. Well, if you're ever in Montreal, I'll be happy to make you a croissant sandwich, orb lady. Rob complaining about the USB mic I got for us. I stormed out. See, Marty, the best quality is the XLR cable. Everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. It's just if you really want that high fidelity audio sound, you need the XLR to XLR cable. Marty, It distorts. When it's just USB, it distorts. Oh, how about that? It distorts. I'm hanging out in one of the Carolinas. I know soon you're going to have to go. You're going to have to go home soon. Why would I want to leave, Marty? I like it here. That's very kind of you to say. Somehow I don't think it's all the way true. That movie gave me fear of success and fear of being parasocial, so I can't create or enjoy now. Fuck you, Steve Kingo. Actually, one really interesting thing about it, watching it last night, is you realize that, like, Annie Wilkes in Misery, she's just doing, like that's what modern stan culture is like, where they think that, like, fictional characters are real and stuff. And they base their whole identities around them. Like, that's such a common phenomenon now. I guess it's always been common to extent, but it's so common. When you have this, like, discourse about, like, oh, when you have, like, a sex scene in a film or a novel, it's like the characters can't consent because they're fictional. You're forced, or when you do, like, mean things to characters, you're, like, hurting them or torturing them, or, like, when you have characters do bad things, it means that you, like, support the bad things that they do. And she's entitled to what she wants out of the media, for sure. You probably could do, like, a modern version of that. That's like could have been a modern update that would deal with a lot of those themes. She's like 90% of fandom on TikTok now, for sure. If Taylor Swift didn't have bodyguards, I'm deranged 22-year-old. I've done Misery tour already. Man, that's a crazy rabbit hole. The Swiftie rabbit hole. I saw just a TikTok today about... someone talking about Taylor Swift's relationships and how they're all like... They talk about her like she's like their friend that they know. It's very strange when you go way past that. Imagine a fucked up situation where you had a bunch of, like, followers of someone that thought they were friends in real life. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how messed up that would be? Can you imagine how much of a sick person you'd have to be like that? I know, it's crazy. No, but it's very strange, you know, when they talk like that. parasocial relationship? Why, yes, me and this famous person have a pair of social relationships. Thanks for noticing. That's right. Is this a safe space to discuss how Taylor Swift sucks? I mean, I guess. I actually don't hate Taylor Swift's music at all. I think it's pretty good. You know, she's a good singer and songwriter. She's a good performer. I just think maybe people need to just relax a little bit. People need to chill out a little bit. And also, I think she's, for the level of talent that she has, and she has a lot of talent, I think maybe the amount of success she's had is maybe a little bit overblown. You know? We can't have you taken down by Swifties. No, but I'm not a Swiftie, but I respect Taylor. I think she's a really talented person. I like a lot of her singles. I think are pretty good. I don't know if I'm really in the target audience. I do like pop music, as you know. If you're held hostage by Swifties, blink twice. That'd be funny. They do they see you on the street. They do the like Invasion of the Body Snatchers thing. Like, ah! Is she bigger than MJ was? I don't know about that. I don't think so. I think the whole thing about like the Billboard charts and everything are deceptive. Like the idea that Drake, even if Drake passes or ties or surpasses Michael Jackson in terms of like number one albums on Billboard, there's just you can't ever say that Drake was more popular than Michael Jackson. You just can't. Like, it's just, there's no comparison to Taylor Swift or anybody else. No one will ever be that big again. No, I agree with that. Also, MJ was cool. It depends on what you're referring to. I like a lot of his music, certainly. I grew up listening to Michael Jackson. Was he cool? That I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that. We talking U.S.-backed war crimes and genocide, Joe Brandon, or what? We will. Give me another. What time is it? Give me another like 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes to warm up here. And then we will do that. Beyonce is a better comparison to MJ, but even then, I don't think she compares. No, I don't think anyone will ever compare. And like Michael Jackson was like a god. I guess for many people, Taylor Swift or Beyonce are like that status, or Drake, but I just don't think it's quite the same thing. Are you of the opinion that this whole Taylor Swift NFL thing is a total op? Maybe. I don't know. For sure that there's publicists and people behind the scenes milking it for all it's worth. That's for sure. I don't make the rules. I was not even alive, but Drake is not cool. That's my point. No, Drake is not cool. Even though I like some of Drake's music too. I don't hate it at all. But the idea that he would compare with someone like Michael Jackson is just farcical. Just ridiculous. Drake's overrated, should not be the face of Toronto. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I should be the face of Toronto. Look at this face. Shouldn't this face be the face of Toronto? I think so. It's true, no one is mysterious enough. Yeah, and you see with social media, you see all the insecurities and bullshit coming through. Yeah, Drake whining about old beef, getting mad at like female artists that are successful. He just seems like a really deeply insecure person. Yeah, deeply uncool man with that level of stardom. His Raptors shtick is so fake. For sure. I mean, he's a guy that just goes with whatever is like with sports, like whoever is the best. If it was the 90s, he would have been like, yeah, I love sports. I love the Yankees and the Dallas Cowboys and the Detroit Red Wings and, whatever it is. The Kentucky Wildcats. I still remember that NCAA championship game, Kentucky versus Syracuse in 1995. So my brother had taped that game, so I watched that game a bunch. I had the VHS of the Syracuse versus Kentucky NCAA championship. That Kentucky team was loaded, absolutely loaded. They had Antoine Walker, they had Ron Mercer, they had Tony Delk. A couple of other big names were on that team. And Syracuse, of course, had John Wallace, who never had that great of an NBA career, was a really good college player, though. John Wallace. He was the star on that Syracuse team. And frankly, he fouled out of the game. He picked up a couple of ticky-tack fouls in that game that probably should not have been called, which probably changed the outcome of the game. I thought I was listening to Talent, but instead it's just good engineering is my take of finding out I like something like Drake, Perry, Minaj, etc. I mean, that's a big part of it for pop music, definitely. But, I think different pop stars, I'm always interested to know like where their creative input ends and where the production team begins. Tony Delk, a person you definitely didn't make up. No, I didn't, because Tony Delk was a really good college player. Never really had that great of an NBA career. He was kind of like a journeyman role player in the NBA, but randomly had one of the highest scoring games of the season in like the late 90s. He scored like 53 for the Suns one game and never really did much else besides that. Really good three-point shooter. He would probably thrive today, Tony Delk. Are you into the Menzingers at all? No, I don't know them. I'm really not plugged into very much like new music that's coming out. I mostly listen to my own music. That's how much of a dork that I am. I listen to my own music, or I listen to my like Steely Dan, Christopher Cross, Alan Parsons Project, Boz Scaggs, that kind of stuff. Billy Ocean, Doobie Brothers, Lindsey Buckingham. Does Montreal still have a music scene? I haven't heard of anyone escaping into stardom like Arcade Fire in over 10 years. Well, and that was they became big mega stars. I mean, I guess technically there's still a music scene. I'm not connected to it in any way, so I can't comment on it too much. The last like major band, you can call them a major band, they get a lot of radio play here, but I don't know how big they are outside of Montreal, is this band Half Moon Run. They get quite a lot of radio play here, but I don't know if they're like actually big. Are you a Radiohead liker or Radiohead disliker? There are only those two kinds of person. Big Radiohead liker. I think like after In Rainbows, I stopped listening to their new albums. I haven't listened to their new albums much, like in about, 10, 15 years, but that run of albums in the 90s and early 2000s was pretty unparalleled. Also, the creative bravery of putting out OK Computer and becoming this massive band and then pivoting to Kid A, Amnesiac. Like, not a lot of bands can really pull off that transition. Like, you listen to OK Computer and it's like, wow, what a great album. And then you put on Kid A and you're in the opening 30 seconds, you're like, what is this? What am I listening to? This is so weird. And there's no guitars or there's no anything going on. And it's like, they really like committed to that sort of like digital sort of revolution to songwriting and recording. In an interesting way. Yeah, it is a stunning catalog. You can't deny that. Don't even get me started on In Rainbows. That was probably the last one that I listened to, and I didn't even really listen to it that much. I personally like the more middling 90s stuff. That's just my shit. That's what I'm into. High and Dry and Street Spirit and Fake Plastic Trees. I really like that kind of shit. I really like their newer stuff. Really, I'm old school like that. I liked the early kind of stuff. I'll say I'm a Radiohead hater. Okay, wow. Very good live band, too. My Iron Lung is a good one, yeah. Yeah, very, very good live. I'll say It's Okay to Be Wrong. And I Might Be Wrong is actually a really good later Radiohead song. Or mid-period, I guess. I think that was in Vanilla Sky, that Tom Cruise. Is it Cameron Crowe that directed that? I like Vanilla Sky. I haven't seen that in a while, actually. Yeah, Hail to the Thief. I really liked Hail to the Thief. I thought that was a good mix of their older sound with that kind of new embrace of all the new shit that they were doing. And I saw them on that tour. I saw them at Parc Jean-Mance here in Montreal on that tour. It was fantastic. Although it is funny because you see the limits of their or whatever kind of political message they were trying to include in their music. Hail to the Thief. Like, it's so like, it's very like college dorm room. Yeah, like Bush years. Yeah, man. It's like Hail to the Chief, but like it's the fucking thief. He's the thief. Yeah, and the Israel stuff. I mean, that's a good way to get into that. They got criticized for playing in Israel, and rather than like engaging with any of that criticism, they're just like, no, our artistic integrity tells us we must go and play for the Israeli. And it's like, fuck off, Radiohead. Be a woman and watch Vanilla Sky and get back to me. I definitely haven't seen it in about 20 years or so, or probably a bit more. And I would get that criticism as well. But also it's like, we don't need to relitigate Vanilla Sky. It's not that good. and it does have that kind of sexism. I guess like it seems like that's being held. His behavior is held up as being kind of like gross, even though he's the hero of the movie. We don't need to argue about it though. They're not into politics. Electioneering is another good kind of political Radiohead song, though. What happened to Cameron Crowe? Cameron Crowe was like on a huge hot streak in the early 2000s, and then he did Elizabethtown. They did Elizabethtown, and that kind of was a dud. And then he's never really been able to go back to that kind of A-list since then. I need that perfect Israel segue, and you're doing this. Well, I need to take a bit more time. Fuck you. I'm sorry, Sean. Yeah, I know he did We Bought a Zoo. You know what? We Bought a Zoo. It's kind of like a silly movie. I watched it. I think it's fine, but really good soundtrack by that Yonsei guy from Sigur Rós. He did the whole soundtrack for We Bought a Zoo, and it's fantastic. And yeah, if I've not seen Vanilla Sky and I have no idea what happens in it. Basically, Tom Cruise is this like rich, wealthy, handsome playboy who treats Cameron Crowe like shit, and uses her and then kind of ignores her, and then she kind of seeks revenge and fucks up his life pretty badly. Let's talk about Heart for the rest of the show. I love Heart. It's Ann Wilson. But it's not Ann Wilson that's married to Cameron Crowe, is it? Ann Wilson from Heart. Ann Wilson from Heart, one of the very best singers ever in rock music. One of the absolute very best to ever do it. Just an unbelievable talent. Like, go and try and do a Heart song at karaoke. Actually, don't do that. Don't do that, because it's a terrible idea. Blur or Oasis. I was never huge into either, frankly, but I was probably more of an Oasis guy. I've seen them live and it changed me. I openly sobbed in public. Hell yeah.
You can count on me and have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Does anyone know if Hamas has a PayPal or Venmo that I can send my donations to?
Thank you, Johnny, for the 4 months of Tier 1. I'll just go ahead and send that to my personal contact, okay? You transferred it to me, and I'll transfer it over to my Hamas contact. I'll send it over to them. That's not banned from Twitch. I'm not going to get banned. No one's getting banned. No one is getting banned. We all just like to talk about the news, and we like to sometimes do a couple of jokes and japes. Okay, that's all. If it's still technically a free country. Although, like, we are really seeing, like, McCarthyism now, aren't we? I did everything right and Twitch indicted me. The Canadian FBI, I guess, would be CSIS. Like, we're seeing people losing their jobs. We're seeing people now retracting statements and stuff because they don't want to get caught up in the hysteria. A guy got fired for retweeting The Onion. Yeah, okay, so the FBI is the RCMP and CSIS is like the Canadian CIA. Really, they're all just taking their cues from the actual CIA, so. No, it's really kind of shocking, isn't it? It's amazing, too, because you see people like Barry Weiss being like, as difficult as it is to stand with Israel right now, as much personal sacrifice that it takes to stand with Israel. And it's like, what sacrifice? Who is losing anything by being like, I support Israel? That's like literally what our entire political class is saying. That's what our entire media is saying. That's what like major brands and sports teams are saying, like, we support Israel. Who is losing anything? What consequences do you have? Oh, people are going to be mean to you? A few people might be mean to you online. A few people in your life might be like, hey, I don't really agree with your stance there. That's it. Like, there's people not only are people in Gaza losing their fucking lives by the thousands in this mass genocidal bombing campaign, but people that are promoting this kind of promoting Palestinian liberation or talking about this are being fired from their jobs. Literally, counties of like 20,000 people are passing ordinances for Stand With Israel Day. Yeah, like, fuck off. Conservatives complaining that CNN is pro-Hamas propaganda. That's great. That is really great stuff. A genocide researcher was denied a job opportunity because of her pro-Palestine tweets. Yeah, we're right back there. It hasn't been like this really since September 11th. And the ensuing weeks and months. If you said what the old lady hostage of Hamas said, you'd be blacklisted from any media job. Or what Haaretz is saying. Haaretz are not like anti-Zionist. They're like, it's like Israel's mainstream newspaper. When this happened, Haaretz editorial board was like, this is the fault of the Israeli government. This is the fault of Netanyahu. That's a stance that will get you fired from your job in Canada, but which is still a totally non-controversial thing to say in Israel. Like, it's absurd. Tom Cruise and Natalie Portman's agent was made to step down from CAA's board, but is being allowed to continue representing them, which is funny. Weak reprimand. Yeah. I saw the Hollywood celebs as well signed on to the We Stand With Israel letter. Like, what is this big difficult thing to stand with Israel? It's not, actually. It's not difficult, and it's not brave, and you don't sacrifice anything. Except maybe damaging personal relationships that you might have in your life with people that don't want to be friends with someone that supports the mass bombing of children. You know? I can't say my sympathy is too high. If you're going to stand up there and use whatever platform you have to be like, I support the relentless nonstop bombing of children, then like, yeah, I think you deserve to have some people like just not being friends with you. That's not my problem. Fox Sports keeps saying on the playoff broadcast they donated $1 million to Israel to help the victims of... so obviously I'm holding my breath for commensurate announcement of $5 million for Palestinians. Yeah, exactly. So brave. So very brave. I got these apples and they're like really big. Look at the size of this apple. Let's it is a Honeycrisp, yes. Let's put on a video or something. To like get us started here. I'll put on a little video that we can look at. And I'll eat my apple, and then we got more. We got more to talk about. Look, there's a new video from Ben Norton, actually. Israel's destruction of Gaza is West's fascistic plan for Global South, warns Colombia's president. So everything we've been talking about lately, how it seems like it's kind of this turning point for the empire. I think Ben is going to be a good person to speak on that. So let's watch this video, this Ben Norton video, and I got a bunch of other things to look at and to talk about. I'm sure this will stimulate a lot of discussion as well.
Israel continues to bomb the besieged Gaza Strip, killing thousands of Palestinian civilians, including thousands of children. But in response, there is a mass uprising of people around the world. There are protests in basically every single major city all across the planet, and many governments, in particular in the Global South, are speaking out against these Israeli massacres of Palestinian civilians and accusing Israel not only of war crimes, but of genocide. On the other hand, the United States and European countries are some of the very few nations that are supporting Israel. And I have a separate video in which I discuss how the United States has been blocking international efforts at holding a ceasefire, and Washington is also sending billions of dollars of weapons to Israel to help it kill more Palestinian civilians. I will link to that in the description below. However, Western politicians have acknowledged that they do not represent the majority of the world population. The Financial Times quoted a senior diplomat from a G7 country who said, quote, "We have definitely lost the battle in the Global South. Forget about rules, forget about world order. They won't ever listen to us again." And many developing countries support the Palestinian cause, seeing it through the prism of self-determination and a push against the global dominance of the United States, Israel's most important backer. And also, the fact is simply that the Western countries that support Israel are the nations that colonized the Global South. And today, the vast majority of countries in the Global South can see that Israel is continuing that same kind of European colonial project against the Palestinian people.
Always the same map.
But one of the most incredible examples of a Global South country that has come out strongly in support of Palestine is the Latin American nation of Colombia. This is truly historic on many fronts because, first of all, Colombia had been one of the most loyal allies of both the United States and of Israel in Latin America, a region where there are many left-wing anti-imperialist governments that are against U.S. neocolonialism and Israeli settler colonialism. But another very important reason is that for decades, the Colombian military and paramilitary groups linked to the Colombian government have worked very closely with the Israeli military. Israel trained many of the right-wing paramilitary groups and death squads in Colombia that were involved in massacring civilians, in stealing land from poor farmers and indigenous nations and Afro-Colombian communities. Also, Israel trained some of the Colombian paramilitary fighters who were involved in drug trafficking, working closely with drug cartels. So Israel has played a very nefarious role in Latin America, supporting right-wing extremist groups and death squads and paramilitaries that are trying to destabilize left-wing governments in the region, like in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, or in Cuba. In fact, many of those leftist governments in Latin America broke off formal diplomatic relations with Israel in protest of Israel's massacres of Palestinian civilians. But Colombia had always been the loyal US and Israeli ally in the region. But that changed in 2022 with the election of Colombia's first ever left-wing president, Gustavo Petro. And Petro has really spoken out strongly in support of Palestinian rights, and he has forcefully condemned the Israeli apartheid regime for carrying out genocide and crimes against humanity. Furthermore, this is also very significant totally because Spanish. Until recently, Colombia was actually known as the Israel of Latin America. That was a term that was created by Venezuela's leftist revolutionary president Hugo Chavez back in 2009. Venezuela formally broke off diplomatic relations with the Israeli apartheid regime in response to Israel's massacre in Gaza in late 2008 and early 2009. And Colombia had always been a close U.S. ally, hosting numerous U.S. military bases. So Hugo Chavez said that Colombia is the Israel of Latin America. In particular, he was referencing Colombia's close relationship with the U.S. military, directly collaborating, and the fact that it hosts numerous U.S. military bases. He was basically saying that Israel is a large U.S. military outpost in West Asia, in a strategically important region with access to hydrocarbons, oil and gas, access to the Mediterranean. So Chavez and many other leftists in Latin America were arguing that Colombia played the same role in the U.S. empire in Latin America that Israel has played for the U.S. empire in West Asia. And in fact, the right-wing presidents of Colombia were very proud of the fact that the leftist anti-imperialists in the region condemn them as the Israel of Latin America. Here's a 2013 article in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which is titled "Colombian President Proud to be Called the Israel of Latin America." And it discusses a trip that the previous conservative president of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos...
The empire, that's a really good pause face. The empires can't stop taking L's. Really, it's collapsing in real time. It's really amazing to look at, honestly. Especially because we've been covering this for now 3 years, almost every day. And we're seeing things just fall apart at just an increasing clip. That's why I think this in context is important to talk about Colombia's role as being an outpost for Western imperialism and U.S. hegemony in Latin America, and you've lost fucking Colombia. You've lost Colombia, and they're now criticizing this and talking about the global South and talking about the role Israel is playing. It's just it's really amazing to watch. It's really just all slipping away for the empire. And it's scary because we know that can lead to conflict, and we know that these people are not going to just give up, but you have to appreciate it. It's severe dying empire vibes. This whole thing, this whole Israel bombardment of Gaza and just all the propaganda totally falling flat, all the lies being exposed, no one's buying it. Global mass movement rising of people supporting Palestine despite whatever pathetic efforts they're making to link that to terrorism or Hamas or whatever. No one's buying it. People aren't buying it here. They're certainly not buying it elsewhere in the global South. We're really just seeing the whole thing just collapse in real time. It's honestly amazing to see. It really is amazing. Biden foreign policy will be studied historically as a monumental failure. For sure. I mean, he's the one that's he's the steering the Titanic into the iceberg, He's the one holding the bag. So, but they had a chance to have a different vision for foreign policy, and they have not taken that. They've just made all the exact same mistakes and doubled down on all the failed policies. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, though.
Took to Israel. So going from that, and then just a few years later, having Colombia's first ever left-wing president, Gustavo Petro, condemning Israel for committing genocide and supporting Palestine. This is a massive historic shift, and I want to talk about some of the geopolitical implications of that today. In response,
yeah, Red Scary, that's something else. I did notice that. I noticed right away, so you don't need to comment on it. Yeah, all their decisions have been really bad, and they forced enemies to become friends. I mean, that's the ultimate example of how much of a failure it's been. All these countries that were split, they were successfully divided and conquered. You've got Russia and China as the big example. Iran working with Russia and China as well. Venezuela, like all these disparate cultures with different political backgrounds and different histories and different and long histories of like animosity towards one another in some cases, especially with Iran and Saudi Arabia, working together just because they sense the blood in the water of the empire. And it's like they've been forced into that just through pure belligerence and pure American ignorance and chauvinism. Yeah, he's like uniting the world. He's like an anti-imperialist hero just by like completely fucking up so badly. The moment Russia and China were finally players, countries jumped ship. Yeah, and you see Russia intervening in Syria. You see them starting to work together, and all of a sudden, people around the global South get the message, like, okay, we don't have to abide by these like rules anymore. We do love to see it, frankly. We do. Yeah, as soon as China stood up. And that's why we have to support that as Western socialists, as Western Marxists or whatever. That's exactly why we need to support that. And not sit around here every day and critique, wow, it's not good enough or whatever, even though I was doing a little bit about that yesterday. But I think that was justified. India is kind of the last domino standing, for sure. And they kind of have a foot in both worlds, don't they? That's the kind of interesting thing about them. They're still kind of trying to hedge their bets, but I think even people in India know which way the wind is blowing. I think everyone knows that the American empire is swirling the drain. Everyone has kind of like gotten the message on that. Comrade Biden working from the highest position inside empire. Maybe he really was Dark Brandon all along. Maybe he was Dark Brandon all along. He's a subversive agent. He spent his whole career trying to get up to that highest level of government. Now he's twisting the knife in the empire, playing the long game. You gotta hand it to him, frankly. If that is the case, you do have to hand it to him. And everyone knows it's more fatal to be the U.S.'s friend than an enemy. Absolutely. I mean, it's been decades of evidence of that. And Ukraine is learning that harsh lesson right now. What happens when you choose to be a friend and an ally or a vassal state or a client state of the United States? How does that go for you? I don't know how many more times people need to learn this lesson around the world, but that's the latest harsh lesson in reality of what that means.
In response to Israel's massacres of Palestinian civilians, the Colombian president Gustavo Petro tweeted out an image that said, "In Colombia, we do not support genocides." And he was very clearly referencing Israel. Why did Petro do this? Well, specifically, he was responding to criticisms by the Israeli government that attacked him and claimed that he's supposedly anti-Semitic, which is the ridiculous smear that Israel uses to insult anyone who objectively correctly points out its war crimes and apartheid policies and racism and crimes against humanity. More specifically, Israel was responding to an incredible statement that Gustavo Petro made on Twitter. And I translated this. It's quite long, but I want to read it all. I translated it into English because I think this is one of the best statements on the war in Israel-Palestine, on Israel's genocidal war on the Palestinian people, because it reflects the view of many leaders in the global South, in particular those who are critical of imperialism, and they can see very clearly that Western countries, the policies that Israel is carrying out against Palestinians is what other Western countries have carried out in their colonies and continue to carry out today in the formerly colonized countries of the global south. So this is the statement written by Colombian President Gustavo Petro. Quote, "The barbarism of consumption based on the death of others is taking us to an unprecedented rise of fascism and therefore to the death of democracy and freedom. It is barbarism, or the global 1933, as I call it. 1933 was the year Hitler came to power. What we see in Palestine will also be the suffering of all of the peoples of the global south. The West defends its excessive consumption and its standard of living based on destroying the atmosphere and climate, and to defend it, knowing that it will cause the exodus of migrants from the south to the north, and not only of the Palestinian people, the West is ready to respond with death. The West does not want to transform its economic system, only as far as the markets will go to decarbonize it. And it knows that the efforts will be minuscule to save life on the planet. Its policy seeks to defend the bubble of consumption of the rich on the planet and not to save humanity, whose majority is disposable to it, like the children of Gaza. That is why there are strong anti-immigration policies. That is why there are concentration camps for immigrants, the thousands who died in shipwrecks. That is the reason for the Tapón del Darién, which is the location where many migrants cross from Colombia to Panama, which is very dangerous and many people die. He says that is why there are economic blockades of rebel countries. And of course, he's referring to the US blockade of Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua and Iran and Zimbabwe and the DPRK. He's drawing a parallel between the Israeli blockade of Gaza to the US blockade of rebel countries that have anti-imperialist policies. So Petro
Israel's
continues,
just a colonial
says,
offshoot
quote,
of the United States.
"The right wing in the West sees the solution to the climate crisis as a final solution. The right wing once again dreams of Hitler and conquest. The majority of the rich and Aryan peoples of the West and our Latin American oligarchies who do not see another world to live in other than that of the malls of Florida or Madrid." So he's saying that the right wing is willing to sacrifice the entire planet and commit genocide against poor people in the global south in order to save their capitalist consumer lifestyle based, in the malls of Florida and Madrid. And he says, quote, "The right-wing forces in the global south use violence. They destroy democracy. They feel by the north legitimized to do so. They believe they can kill and commit genocide. They just need the blessing of world power." He's, of course, talking about the United States. And finally, Petro said, quote, "We are moving into barbarism if we do not change the power. The life of humanity, and especially of the people..."
Finished having a massive panic attack. How are you all? We're doing okay. Old Dutch, or I am. I can't speak for everyone, I guess. What's the matter? Old Dutch, what's going on? What's going on? You're all right. You're okay. Great. Another great pause face.
Of the global south depends on the way in which humanity
If only
chooses
there
the
was an
path to
alternative to
overcome the
barbarism. If
climate
only.
crisis produced by the wealth of the north. Gaza is just the first
Just this shit?
experiment
Yeah,
to
I
deem
know.
all of us disposable. This is truly a remarkable statement. Petro hit the nail on the head. He's pointing out that these Israeli colonial policies have direct parallels to the Western capitalist policies that have gone on for centuries, and that Western governments are basically doing the same thing to the global south that Israel is doing to the Palestinian people, and that Western imperialist countries, these capitalist extremist political forces in the West, they see life of Latinos and Africans and Asians as just as disposable as the Israeli fascists see the lives of Gazan children. This is what led the Israeli apartheid regime to condemn Gustavo Petro, the Colombian president, publicly, calling him anti-Semitic because he compared Israel to Nazi Germany.
The CIA is down
but that's
very
of course
bad.
ridiculous. He's not anti-Semitic at all. Nothing he said is remotely
BR
anti-Semitic,
BR3.
and that's why he responded
Langley is
on
hurting right
Twitter
now.
with
They're
this
down
image
very
saying,
bad.
"In Colombia, we do not support genocide."
Shit doesn't work anymore.
And when Israel smeared Petro, claiming absurdly that he's anti-Semitic, in response, the Colombian president was very angry, obviously, and he tweeted out another incredible statement. I mean, just
I didn't see
fiery
this
statement.
one.
You
We
can
looked at
tell
the
also that
previous
he
one
wrote this
yesterday.
in anger and was kind of angry because there are a few typos. But I'm going to translate the main points. Again,
Yeah,
this is so
fell asleep
powerful.
at the wheel in Colombia. They just assumed that they would have perpetual control over Colombia. It was just kind of given as sort of an assumption. It was just given, you know. Now they're looking around, going, "What the hell's going on here? What in the world?"
Petro said, "If we have to suspend foreign relations with Israel, we suspend them. We do not support genocides." And he said that Israel was insulting the president of Colombia. And he said, "As Simón Bolívar taught us, Colombia is an independent, sovereign, and fair country." So he's saying that Israel is violating the sovereignty of Colombia.
Is that good?
And he pointed out that Israel has a history of supporting right-wing death squads in Colombia. And specifically, he named two different Israeli former military officers, who I'll talk about in a bit, Yair Klein and Rafael Etan, who were part of the Israeli intelligence services and military, and they later traveled to Colombia along with the CIA, and they worked with the US to train right-wing death squads to kill leftists and to steal the land of poor peasants and farmers in Colombia to help US corporations like the United Fruit Company, Chiquita. And anyway, so in the statement, Petro says that in Colombia, Israel and its military officers, Israel unleashed massacres and genocide inside Colombia. So he's saying that not only is Israel guilty of genocide in occupied Palestinian territory, but also in Colombian territory. And he said that he demands peace in Colombia, peace in Palestine, and peace in the world. And then furthermore, Petro said, this is an exact quote, "One day, the army and the government of Israel will ask us for forgiveness for what their people did, what their men did in our land, unleashing genocide." And he's again talking about Israel's role training these right-wing death squads. I'll talk about that more in a bit. And here he says very clearly, he says, "I will hug them and I will cry for the murder of Auschwitz and the murder of Gaza and for the Colombian Auschwitz." So once again, he's comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, and he's saying that what the Nazis did with the concentration camps in Auschwitz is also what Israel is doing to Gaza and what Israel did to Colombia. And he says, he concludes this powerful statement saying, "Hitler will be defeated for the good of humanity and peace and freedom in the world." So once again, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. I mean, powerful,
Look at how happy Ben
powerful words. Now, as you can imagine, this unleashed a huge political scandal inside Colombia and around the world, with the right-wing forces in Colombia, which are still very powerful, attacking the president. They're all very pro-Israel. And the media in Colombia belongs almost entirely to a small handful of wealthy oligarchs, including linked to former presidents. And they were constantly attacking Petro. So in response, what did Petro do? Well, he dug in his heels and he went even further. And he commented on this international scandal. And he said that we in Colombia have a new independent foreign policy. And he said in the last few decades,
Nazi Germany too. Yeah,
our foreign policy was completely subordinated to the United States.
Stalingrad.
And he said that the United States foreign policy was our foreign policy, and Colombia voted against the vast majority of the nations of the world and violated international law. And specifically, he's talking about how Colombia joined with the US and Israel at the United Nations to support the illegal US blockade of Cuba, whereas almost every single country on earth, almost, more than 96% of the countries on earth voted against the illegal US blockade of Cuba. Colombia was one of the only countries that joined in. And furthermore, Petro said that before he came to office, in the decades of right-wing rule in Colombia, that the Colombian regime always, furthermore, its diplomatic policies were once again subordinated to U.S. foreign policy, and their goal was to use U.S. protection to prevent international organizations from investigating the Colombian state for violating human rights and killing people. And of course, the Colombian government, under years of right-wing rule, was involved in numerous scandals, including the false positive scandal, falsos positivos, in which the Colombian military killed thousands of innocent people and then dressed them up in uniforms and falsely claimed that they were part of armed socialist guerrilla groups. So anyway, he's talking about the years of right-wing rule in which Colombian foreign policy was subordinated to the United States and violated international law. And he says, today, our foreign policy is completely different. Now, our foreign policy is based on struggling unilaterally, working unilaterally to fight against the climate crisis. He said also it's based on respecting international law and above all, guaranteeing national independence, saying that, again, Colombia is now an independent country. And in the following days, Petro tweeted so many different messages of support for Palestine. He retweeted dozens of different videos and photos of protests in support of Palestine all around the world, condemning Israeli war crimes in Gaza. And he also tweeted a video of a protest in solidarity with Palestine in London, in the UK. And he wrote, quote, "They said that by defending a people from genocide, I was alone, as if fighting for justice was a solitary task. I was just one of the voices to rise up after hundreds of millions of human beings did it. The people who are alone are those who are unjust and who are genocidal." So he's saying that the world is with Palestine.
It's so weird, PM trio, how like Boric has been such a disappointment and has proven himself to be like a lapdog of empire with this like social democratic veneer. And fucking Petro in Colombia is just going ham. I was not expecting that, definitely. His point that the climate crisis is basically international war by capitalists against all of humanity, but especially the global south, is one that many people don't understand. Absolutely. And like that's something that I've thought about a lot over the last couple of years. How these climate crises are going to lead to, if we think the refugee crisis or refugee or immigrant caravans that we've seen in the southern border or in Europe are big now, like in 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to make that look like nothing. And what we're headed towards right now, if nothing changes, is like an absolute horror show, climate genocide, concentration camps, like full mask off, mass death, basically. And I think it's really cool that Petro is making that kind of point. Yen was a guerrilla as well. Always class war. Exactly. Always class war. Boric was an anarchist adjacent student organizer. Petro's a former guerrilla, so it doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, I guess it shouldn't. I guess just it being Colombia, it was easy to not expect all that much, but it's been really surprising. Turns out the number doesn't go up once 70% of the planet lives as nomads in search of water. Yeah. Jesus.
Palestine, and only a small minority of people support the Israeli apartheid regime's genocide against Palestine. Once again, reflecting the fact that objectively speaking, the majority of the world population represented by the global south does support Palestine, and apartheid Israel really only has the support of the Western powers, and then you can maybe throw in India, which has a far-right government, fascistic government
it's really
as well,
only the government
that is allied increasingly with the West. Petro then followed up with another tweet in which he said, "The world rose up against injustice and genocide." And then he said, as a criticism of the Colombian right wing, he said, "Only in Colombia, those who applaud those who are bombing children were not able to understand it." So he's saying that the vast majority of the world supports Palestine, and the conservative right-wing oligarchic forces in Colombia that support Israel as it bombs children do not represent the will of the majority of the world. And by the way, a quick note, when Petro tweeted that on October 24th, it was right after he arrived in China, in Beijing, and he was invited to visit China by Chinese President Xi Jinping. So while
as soon as he talks to Xi, he's just like, all right, I'm gonna go full steam ahead here. I love that. Yeah, I think this is the happiest I've ever seen Ben Norton doing this kind of commentary. It's wonderful.
Ever left-wing president is condemning Israeli genocide and supporting Palestine. He's also allying increasingly with China, along with other left-wing forces in Latin America. So we really are living in a very unique moment in history. The political balance of forces around the world is really shifting, and even countries that
even just over the last
longtime
U.S.
allies, whose governments were basically just U.S. client regimes, like Colombia, which had been referred to as the Israel of Latin America, are now exercising an independent foreign policy and condemning colonialism. Now, in the case of Colombia, I think this is also something personal for Gustavo Petro. Obviously, it is political, and that's why we can see
I think you're talking about Bolivia.
left-wing governments in Latin America, especially, the revolutionary anti-imperialist governments in Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua and Bolivia are supporting Palestine. But in the case of Gustavo Petro, he himself, when he was young, he was involved in an armed leftist movement called M19 that took up arms against the Colombian right-wing narco regime that was completely undemocratic and massacring leftists and farmers on behalf of U.S. corporations. And Israel played a key role in training some of the right-wing death squads that massacred leftists, including people like Gustavo Petro, his allies. This was spelled out in a very good Al Jazeera article from way back in 2003, and it's titled Israel's Latin America Trail of Terror. And it begins with a quote from a notorious Colombian drug trafficker and paramilitary leader who was backed by the CIA and by Israel, named Carlos Castaño. And again, this is a longtime CIA asset and drug dealer. And he famously wrote in his autobiography, Mi Confession, Mi Confesión, he wrote, quote, I learned an infinite amount of things in Israel, and to that country I owe part of my essence, my human and military achievements. That's a quote from Colombian paramilitary leader and indicted drug trafficker Carlos Castaño. Castaño was one of the main leaders of the right-wing Colombian paramilitary groups known as the AUC. This Al Jazeera article pointed out that the AUC was the largest right-wing paramilitary force to ever exist in the Western Hemisphere, and that's why it's very likely that Gustavo Petro, he was targeted by some of these Israeli-trained forces. That's why he accused Israel of committing genocide in Colombia as well. And this notorious Colombian death squad leader and drug dealer was trained in the art of war in Israel in the 1980s. And he wrote in his book, quote, I copied the concept of paramilitary forces from the Israelis. So the same forces that in Israel were carrying out ethnic cleansing against Palestinians and murdering Palestinian civilians and leftists from different Palestinian groups, including communist, socialist, and nationalist groups in Palestine. Well, the right-wing forces backed by the CIA in Latin America were doing the exact same thing. And Castaño, he had a right-wing, the force, the AUC, that was very similar to the Lebanese Phalange, who are the fascist death squads backed by Israel in the Lebanese war. And this article in Al Jazeera notes that the AUC, backed by the US and Israel and Colombia, was by far the worst human rights violator in all of the Americas, and ties between that organization and Israel are continually surfacing in the press. The AUC paramilitaries originally grew out of killers who were hired to protect drone running operations and large landowners. By the way, it was also U.S. corporations that were working with this Colombian death squad. This was acknowledged in an article back in NBC News in 2007 titled Chiquita Admits to Paying Colombia Terrorists. The banana company Chiquita Brands International agreed to a $25 million fine after admitting it paid terrorists for protection in Colombia. And it mentions a Justice Department investigation. And federal prosecutors in the U.S. said the Cincinnati-based company and corporate officers paid millions of dollars between 1997 and 2004 to the AUC, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. This very
just sorry, as a brief timeout. I did a tweet about the thing we were talking about Biden. Here's what I went with. What do you think? Quick. Any notes? Dark Brand has spent decades infiltrating the American government, slowly and methodically working his way right up to the Oval Office to seize control of the levels of power, and steer the U.S. empire directly into the ground. I have no choice but to respect it. There we go. Tweeted.
Very same right-wing death squad
tweeting
and
segment.
NBC News pointed out the AUC has been responsible for some of the worst massacres in Colombia's civil conflict and for a sizable percentage of the country's cocaine exports. So in addition to working for U.S. corporations, these death squads were being trained by Israel. And this Al Jazeera article points out that the AUC, these Colombian paramilitaries, exist outside the law, but often coordinate their actions with the Colombian military in a very similar way to the relationship between the Lebanese Phalange, these fascist death squads, and the Israeli army during the war in Lebanon in the 80s and 90s. Israeli trainers arrived in Colombia in the 1980s to train these fascist Colombian death squad leaders like Carlos Castaño, and also trained other paramilitaries that later made up the AUC. 50 of the best paramilitary death squad leaders in Colombia were sent on scholarships to Israel for further training, according to Colombian police intelligence reports. And of course, Israel provided them with weapons. And Israel also provided weapons to the right-wing dictatorships in Latin America, especially the genocidal regime in Guatemala, which was, of course, they were all backed by the United States as well. I mean, when I say, Israel is doing this, it's always doing this hand in glove with the United States. It's Israel following the orders of the United States as an extension of the US empire. Again, that's why Venezuela's revolutionary leader Hugo Chavez referred to Colombia as the Israel of Latin America. Because just as Israel is an outpost for US imperialism, an extension of US imperialism, Colombia is the same in Latin America. And by the way, this is especially clear when you look at who governs Israel. The longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu, who is basically just a North American. He's a US Republican governing a country in West Asia. Netanyahu was raised in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Fake country.
He spent the most formative years in his life in the United States. He went to high school in Pennsylvania. He then went to MIT and graduated. He studied in college at MIT. And then after, he worked in Boston, and he worked with many Republicans like Mitt Romney.
I mean, it's just amazing, the nonstop stream of like propaganda coming out of Israel with these that are Americans. They're fucking Americans. And they have the audacity to talk about how they're indigenous to the land. All these people, these like settler videos, people talking perfect American accents. I saw there was like the one IDF video that's like a woman's like, put a finger down if you know someone that's been killed in a bombing. And it's like perfect American accent. You're from like fucking Kansas, not Kansas probably, but like, you know what I mean? Sometimes I go to just think of any American cities of the hundreds of cities, and I just my mind goes totally blank. But it's amazing. Like, it's really amazing how we're told over and over, these are their indigenous, their ancestral lands. Your ancestral lands. You have permanent right of return to your ancestral lands. You're from Coney Island or whatever. And the people that actually have lived there for generations are not allowed to go. The people that still have the keys to their grandparents' home, they're not allowed to go back. Have you not seen the coins? No, I've not. What about the cute TikTok mommy with the New York accent making Sammys for the IDF? I saw that. Yeah. Like, maybe I can just take a brief moment here. It was bookmarked, but like a while ago. Like the day in the life TikTok. It's so strange to me, seriously. It is so bizarre. Where is this lady? I bookmarked this to talk about. Fuck.
Bases across the country. This is a day in my life. We're at War Edition. After hearing that there was a major lack of gluten-free, celiac-safe food at army bases across the country, we got together with a gluten-free bakery in Jerusalem to make sure those soldiers got
You're
fed.
not
Gaza
Middle
is
Eastern.
out of power. Hospitals are running out of fuel for their
What the fuck? Oh, sorry. That was like a stitch.
generators. There is
Deliver across the country.
This is like okay. This is like stitched together. I'm trying to find the real thing.
This is a day in my life. We're at War Edition. After hearing that there was a major lack of gluten-free, celiac-safe food at army bases across
The gluten-free, celiac-safe food at the IDF army bases. That's really taking it to the next level as well.
we got together with a gluten-free bakery in Jerusalem to make sure those soldiers got fed. On our way to the bakery,
You're not Middle Eastern. You're American. Go back to America.
Breads, cookies, and cakes to deliver across the country to different soldiers, thanks to volunteers who offered to drive for us. This is a day in my life where
Okay, the longer it goes on longer, but like it's the same thing. But like you're not Middle Eastern. You're not Middle Eastern. You're fucking American or maybe Canadian. Just go home. Just go home now. It's time to go home. You're finished now. Your little adventure is over now. Yeah, they have the means to go home, which they still have. You have the right of return to go back to your actual fucking home in the United States of America. No, I didn't, Marty, I didn't see that. Anyway, it's just, I keep seeing that, right? You keep seeing like propaganda videos of these Israelis who are not in any way Middle Eastern. Like you're not, I get that there's families that have now been there for a few generations. There's people that are born there, but like a lot of the videos that we see are just these fucking Americans. You're not indigenous. You're not from the Middle East. You are not Middle Eastern. I am as Middle Eastern as you are. Yeah, there's the guy, the Brooklyn guy. I mean, that was really a turning point in the propaganda, right? The Brooklyn guy just saying like, if I don't steal your home, someone else is going to steal it. You're from Brooklyn, sir. Like, it is insane.
And of course, he's been a decades-long friend of Donald Trump. Benjamin Netanyahu is the perfect symbol of the fact that Israel is a settler colonialist outpost for U.S. imperialism in one of the most geostrategically regions of the world, one of the most resource-rich regions of the world.
To be fair to Jacob, he probably did more to advance the cause of Palestinian liberation than a lot of people have done in their lifetimes, just by being involved in that little confrontation. He probably did more to change people's minds about Israel than like decades of, as sick as this is, than decades of like footage of nonstop war crimes. It's wild because the IDF is obviously very racist and thinks they can tell all Arabs and Jews apart, but half the time they get it wrong and shoot settlers and let Arabs through the checkpoint. Yeah, I mean, talk about the IDF shooting settlers. There's a lot of stories about that coming out recently as well in relation to this October 7th stuff, which we strangely still don't have a lot of the details on. Isn't that kind of strange? Isn't that a little bit strange that this October 7th and all the mass violence and atrocities has been used to justify this bombing campaign, but they're still quite cagey on the details about what happened? I wonder why that is. Maybe that's something we can explore a bit later. The Israeli did. I think I did see that. That's good. Can you cook a traditional Israeli dish? That's good.
With so many oil and gas reserves, the U.S. empire desperately
I'm sure
wants
get
and
harassed
needs
for it.
a military outpost in that region. Israel has reliably served as an extension of the U.S. empire under the leadership of, again, a North American.
Hey, Sunny Sola.
Netanyahu is a North American. He spent all of the formative years of his life in the U.S., raised in Pittsburgh, friends with Donald Trump, friends with Mitt Romney, and he, of course, obediently always serves U.S. interests. Now, of course, some people will point out that Netanyahu's regime has sometimes conflicted, especially with Democratic presidents, like, when Obama was president. But, I mean, that's, again, because he's a Republican. Netanyahu is an extension of the U.S. Republican Party, and he is in charge of this U.S. imperial outpost in West Asia. So if we go back to this article in Al Jazeera looking at Israel's policy in Latin America, it's an extension of the United States policy in Latin America. In fact, a notorious Israeli mercenary admitted this, and this was reported back in British state media BBC in 2012. in BBC Mundo, which is a Spanish language branch. And this report was about the Israeli mercenary who was leading Colombian paramilitary groups, training them. And he was Yair Klein. And Yair Klein was one of the two Israeli mercenaries mentioned by Gustavo Petro in his comments. And if you go down in this article from BBC, it points out this quote in which he said, quote, "I was in Colombia at the invitation of the Americans, period." So he's saying that it was the United States that told the Israeli mercenaries to go to Colombia to train the right-wing death squads. And then he said, "Everything that the United States cannot do because it's prohibited, it does through other means." And he's very clearly implying that when the United States can't do something legally, it asks Israel to do it on its behalf. And this brings us back to Israel's role supporting right-wing death squads in Latin America. Israel was fulfilling the U.S. imperial role, but because the U.S. couldn't do it overtly, Israel was doing it on Washington's behalf. And this article in Al Jazeera points out that Israel's military relations with right-wing groups and regimes spans Latin America and basically every country: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil,
for sure,
Colombia,
same
Costa Rica,
playbook
Dominican
for
Republic,
decades
Ecuador,
now.
Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. And the article notes that
no, Ben,
Israel
you're just
has
showing off.
excelled in advising, training, and
You're
running
just showing off
intelligence
now.
and
Come on.
counterinsurgency operations in the Latin American dirty war civil conflicts that is supporting the right-wing dictatorships and death squads in their attempt to murder leftists and poor peasants on behalf of big corporations and landowners, in particular in Argentina, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Colombia. And the article talks about Israel's role supporting right-wing landowners in El Salvador against left-wing popular organizations that were acting, so helping the right-wing oligarchs try to kill the poor people. And in the case of El Salvador, one of the most notorious El Salvadorian death squad leaders was Roberto Dobison, who was also, once again, trained by Israel. And Roberto Dobison was so notorious that he was popularly known as Blowtorch Bob because he liked to use a blowtorch to torture people, to torture leftists.
God, that's fucking horrifying. And I wanted to get to a point, we're talking about traditional Israeli cuisine as well, and PK Pokemon says, like, that's why Israeli food is such a joke, because it's just stealing a bunch of Arab and Mediterranean foods and claiming it as its own. Obviously, Jewish food exists. And I think that leads to a broader, interesting conversation, because Israel and Israelis like to promote the idea of Jewish culture and identity coming from Israel, which is not true. And there is this incredible legacy of Jewish culture in literature, in political science, in food and culture, entertainment, so many. There's this amazing, wonderful tradition, Jewish tradition, in all these different things. It has nothing to do with Israel. It comes from the diaspora. That comes from the Jewish diaspora. That's where the actual culture that they try to claim comes from. It doesn't come from Israel. Israel just steals shit from surrounding places and surrounding cultures. I think that's an interesting point that I've seen people making as well. Like I talked about, Montreal, the city of Montreal where I live, it's inseparable from Jewish culture. I mean, Jewish culture has made such a huge contribution to the city of Montreal and our cuisine and everything about this city. None of it has to do with Israel. Nothing has to do with Israel. It's entirely coming from the diaspora community here and the diaspora community all over the world. Acknowledging any contributions from the diaspora makes Israel look bad, so they avoid it. Yeah. I mean, you see parallels with that Ukrainian nationalism and Israeli nationalism as well, right? Remember the segment from the Michael Ignatieff's book about Chrystia Freeland, where he talks about how they view the people in the diaspora as being not real Ukrainians. They're not the real hardcore ones that are trying to invent this kind of new national identity. They're all these Soviet sympathizing, kind of ironic people that don't have anything. They're not the real Ukrainians. I mean, that's what. Or no, sorry. I guess it would be the inverse, because the argument for Chrystia Freeland was that the people in it was so it's actually the inverse. It's the opposite, but it is similar though. There's kind of echoes of each other. What Chrystia Freeland said was that the diaspora was the real Ukrainian
You
nationalism.
can count on me. You're gonna
And
have good
the
old
actual
Rob
people that were
to,
in
talk you
Ukraine
through
were
all
these
this.
Soviet sympathizing, ironic people. And they wanted to replace that. They wanted to replace like the actual people that lived in Ukraine with this like nationalist diaspora. And you see kind of the inverse of that in Israel. And now that's been largely acceptable. That's been largely successful, replacing that and kind of installing that breed of nationalism like in Ukraine, where it used to be strictly or predominantly diasporic. And you kind of see the inverse of that with Israel. It's kind of interesting. They may as well come out and say the eastern half of their country needs to be purged. We know that's been their project for decades anyway. Well, that's the most ridiculous thing to me. I don't know if it's funny because it's so tragic, but they can't even let go. It's like they want to purge the people, but they don't want to lose the land, right? They want to ethnically cleanse the people. The ethnically Russian people, Russian-speaking Ukrainians that are not on board with the whole nationalist project. They want to purge them, but they want to keep the land. So instead, they're fighting this unwinnable war to try and keep the land that's filled with predominantly people that they don't even want to have anything to do with. That's the completely ridiculous thing about that whole conflict. Thank you, Diego, for the gifted sub. What do we think is more fake, Israeli or Canadian cuisine? I mean, Canadian doesn't even really try to be its own distinct thing, though, does it? Like, I don't even think, like, what when you describe Canadian cuisine, I guess I think of, like, maple syrup. I guess maybe it's different for me, Carnova, living in Quebec, because there's maybe something that you can actually claim to be a something resembling a like unique culture and unique cuisine here. We got poutine, but a lot of it is Quebec, and a lot of it, and like the Montreal bagel, again, a lot of it is coming from Quebec, and a lot of that is being influenced by our Jewish diaspora community, like the smoked meat sandwiches, like the Montreal bagels. Yeah. And you go up to like if anyone's ever in Quebec, I would really recommend you go up to the Sugar Shack in the winter. And that is quite delightful, actually. You go to the Sugar Shack, you get some fresh maple syrup, you get a bunch of beans and pork variations. Very good stuff. Anyway, yeah, that's interesting, right? Because we're talking about how fake Canada is and how fake Israeli cuisine is, but then anything that you might point to as being like a unique aspect of Canadian cuisine, or especially Quebec, is just coming from the Jewish diasporic community.
The civil war in El Salvador. He was a complete fascist. And he also was a figure involved in organizing the right-wing party, Arena, which governed El Salvador for many years. And he sent his son to study abroad in Israel. So literally, actual fascists, actual Hitler-admiring Nazis in Latin America have been trained by Israel and the CIA. Again, because Israel and the CIA are working hand in glove together. Now, furthermore, this article on Al Jazeera points out that while the Israelis were training fascist El Salvadorian death squads, they were also supporting Argentina's blatantly anti-Semitic right-wing military dictatorship. So once again, Israel has no problem allying with actual fascists and Nazis and anti-Semites. And this was at a time when the US-backed Argentine fascist dictatorship was disappearing thousands of leftists, killing leftists, throwing them from helicopters, torturing them. I have friends in Argentina whose grandparents and aunts and uncles disappeared and no one ever found them. Everyone just assumed they were killed by the US-backed dictatorship. And of course, Israel played a role in supporting that dictatorship as well. Now, here, this is the point that's very important about Israel stepping in when the US can't do something overtly. So in the case of Nicaragua, Nicaragua was governed by a right-wing dictatorship, a military dictatorship of the Somoza family. It was a family dynasty, basically a right-wing monarchy. And the Somozas were backed by the US, but when US President Jimmy Carter came in, he ordered the end of US military support for the Somoza dictatorship. So what happened? Israel filled the void and immediately increased weapon sales to the Somoza dictatorship. And then Israeli operatives helped to train the right-wing Nicaraguan Contras in Honduras and Costa Rica in order to fight the leftist Sandinista government after the victory of the Sandinista revolution in 1979. And of course, the CIA was doing that as well, because once again, Israel always does this in collaboration with the CIA. Then there was the case of Guatemala, where a US-backed military dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship, committed genocide against the indigenous Maya populations. And
or not even leftists, just random people, random family members, journalists who actually did their jobs. Yeah, trade unionists, teachers,
genocide. He was a literal
artists,
war criminal
poets.
convicted of genocide. And not only was he supported by the US, he was also supported by Israel. And by the way, he was a very conservative evangelical Christian, and he strongly supported Israel for religious reasons, in addition to, his extreme right-wing politics. He saw the indigenous majority of Guatemala as pagan and satanic, and allied with, Judeo-Christian civilization, in his terms, against the indigenous people committing genocide. And this article in Al Jazeera points out that the previous right-wing Guatemalan president, Carlos Araña, said, if it is necessary.
What's this guy's YouTube channel? I'll just link the clip, the video in the chat right now. Really recommend subscribing to Ben's channel. And I'll also just take a moment to remind people to please subscribe to this channel as well. Definitely support Ben Norton's work, but he's doing very well. I need all the help I can get. So if you can, folks, just take a brief moment to remind people to please subscribe to TRRS. $5 a month, completely free of charge with an Amazon Prime account. Every little bit helps. It's the only way that I'm able to keep doing the show each and every day, is if people continue to subscribe and support the show. If you are able to do that, I really appreciate it a lot, and I thank you in advance. And that's all. I don't want to do a big plug. Let's go back to Ben's video.
To turn the country into a cemetery in order to pacify it, I will not hesitate to do so. And that's exactly what happened. Israel provided the Guatemalan military regime with weapons, and they were actively involved in the bloodiest counterinsurgency campaign the hemisphere had seen since the European colonial conquest. The Guatemalan dictatorship, backed by the US and Israel, massacred 200,000 people, mostly indigenous people. And later, the United Nations backed a truth commission that found that the US and Israeli-backed dictatorship was responsible for more than 90% of civilian casualties, whereas the socialist guerrillas that they were trying to kill were responsible for a tiny fraction of the civilian casualties.
And sorry, I just wanted to get to this comment from Guillotine 2020 as well. The postscript to Black Jacobin sort of implies that most genuinely new culture that exists in America comes out of enslaved and formerly enslaved people who are forced to completely shed every element of their traditions. That's been sticking with me. Only by being so totally and forcefully separated from all existing culture can a genuinely new one arise. It's a really interesting way of looking at that.
Less than 10%. And the military dictator backed by the US, Rios Montt, said, quote, "The gorilla," that's the left-wing
very
gorillas,
true about
is
American
the fish,
cuisine, though.
The people are the sea.
Where what we think of American cuisine comes from.
The sea. So this is him justifying genocide.
And not even cuisine, but like art as well. Art and music. Like we're not even talking about food. But the way like formerly enslaved people or people of color have been drivers of American pop culture now for a very long time. Have been pioneers of every major like form of popular music over the last century.
Entire villages of indigenous people, displacing millions of people in Guatemala. And Guatemalan military officers credit Israeli support with turning the tide against the uprising. And this line really says it all. This summarizes it from Al Jazeera. Starting in the 70s, going into the 80s and 90s, the US was no longer able to overtly support the Guatemalan military dictatorship because of its horrendous human rights record, although there was US covert support, of course. So instead, many in the US government, especially in the CIA, supported Israel in taking up the slack. So getting back to Colombia and President Gustavo Petro, it is very likely that he had personal encounters with some of these Israeli-trained fascist death squads in Colombia. They probably killed some of his friends and comrades. And that's why in his statements, talking about Israeli genocide in Palestine, he is also saying that Israel was guilty of unleashing genocide in Colombia. And he named some of the prominent Israeli officers who were involved in training these Colombian paramilitary groups, like Yair Klein, who again was the Israeli military officer, intelligence officer, who trained some of the AUC death squads that were involved in drug trafficking, and who admitted that he did so at the order of the US government. This is especially important in Colombia these days because the Colombian government recently discovered crematorium ovens that were used by these right-wing death squads like the AUC
Jesus Christ.
in Colombia in order to burn the bodies of the victims of the people they killed. So I want to say this again, because when Gustavo Petro is comparing what the US and Israel support to the Nazi Holocaust, it's not an exaggeration. I want to stress this for emphasis. The Colombian government recently discovered, and I have a photo here, crematorium ovens, Nazi-style ovens, that were used to burn the bodies of the victims of these right-wing death squads like the AUC that were backed by the CIA and by Israel in order to massacre leftists in Colombia and also to massacre peasants to steal their land on behalf of U.S. corporations and wealthy Colombian oligarchs.
And look at the ways that the Israel as well is deeply implicated and involved in American policing as well. That became a big talking point, rightfully so, during the George Floyd protests because of that whole technique. Major crossover there, not only training police departments, but also developing technology which is used on Palestinians, spying technology and crowd control technology that's tested there against human subjects in Palestine, and then brought to the United States to shut down social justice or whatever other protests in the United States. It's a military showroom too. It's about sales, not just testing. Same with Ukraine. Again, another link. Yeah. Very dark. But really, really important links to point out. Israel and the CIA in Israel, Palestine, working together in the global south in places like Colombia, working together in inner cities in the United States and elsewhere. Hand in glove. Pretty disturbing shit.
The U.S. government cannot claim it didn't know these kinds of things were happening. In fact, back in 2020,
of course they didn't
the
know.
Associated Press,
Yeah.
the most mainstream of mainstream media outlets, published an article revealing that
Finance
the
death
U.S.
squads?
Defense
We would
Department
never.
always knew that Colombia's previous right-wing president, Álvaro Uribe, had a history of dealings with violent right-wing paramilitary groups. Uribe was one of the closest U.S. allies in Colombia. He's one of the most powerful politicians in all of Colombia. And he was very close in particular to the George Bush administration. And then his hand-picked successor became president when Donald Trump was in power. And he was Iván Duque, the Colombian president. And he was a very close ally of Donald Trump and was a key figure involved in Donald Trump's coup attempt in Venezuela starting in 2019. And Álvaro Uribe, this right-wing former president and drug dealer who was very closely linked to death squads in Colombia, he also played a key role in supporting the coup attempt in Venezuela with Juan Guaidó and all of that. And this article in the Associated Press points out that the U.S. government knew that Uribe had been working with armed groups hired by wealthy landowners in Colombia. Again, these are the death squads hired by the rich landowners. And the Pentagon deputy wrote in a memo to George Bush's defense secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, an architect of the Iraq War, he wrote in a confidential 2004 cable, quote, Uribe almost certainly had dealings with the AUC paramilitaries when he was governor before. So the U.S. government knew that these fascist death squads, the AUC, that the CIA has a history of supporting, and that were using crematorium ovens to burn their bodies of the
Literally
victims,
always
like
the
Nazis.
landowners. Yeah,
the U.S.
interesting.
knew that the Colombian government and right-wing politicians were working hand in glove with these literal fascists. So now you can understand why global South leaders like Gustavo Petro compare Israel to Nazi Germany. Because in Latin America, the people inspired by the Nazis, the literal fascists in Latin America, are supported by the US and Israel.
And
It's not an
sometimes
exaggeration.
actual Nazis.
This is an objective historical fact that you cannot dispute. And this can also explain why Petro apparently is actually quite afraid of Israel, and why, after calling for suspending diplomatic relations with Israel, he partially backtracked. Not entirely. He continued expressing support for Palestine and condemning Israel for committing genocide in Gaza. But originally, the foreign minister of Colombia had told the Israeli ambassador to leave the country, but then he backtracked and said that they were not expelling the Israeli ambassador. Instead, Gustavo Petro met with both the Palestinian ambassador in Colombia, and he also met with the Israeli ambassador, and he called for peace and said that children should not be killed. And this is important because at the same time, Gustavo Petro also announced that Colombia will be opening a Colombian embassy in Ramallah in Palestine. So he partially backtracked. He did not formally cut off relations with Israel. But he did announce that Colombia is opening an embassy in Palestine. He met with the Palestinian ambassador. He took a photo with the Palestinian ambassador wearing the traditional Palestinian scarf known as the kufiya. So this is very clearly a political message. And over at the website Naked Capitalism, the journalist Nick Corbishley wrote a really good article explaining why he thinks Petro partially backtracked on this. And this is an article titled, "Why Did Colombia Change Its Mind About Expelling Israeli Ambassador Over Israel's Genocidal Siege of Gaza?" And in general, Naked Capitalism is a great blog to read. In this article, Nick Corbishley, he names 3 possible reasons for why Petro partially, again, although not entirely, partially backtracked. And I agree wholeheartedly with his analysis here. I'm just going to read a quote from this. Possibility number 1, the Petro government changed course due to fears of the potential economic consequences. Israel had already suspended all military trade with Colombia, including its exports of air defense systems, cybersecurity systems, surveillance systems, and other weapons. This is, by the way, in response to Petro's comments condemning Israeli genocide. Israel, in protest, announced that it's suspending the export of military equipment. However, this article points out, what were to happen if Tel Aviv were to halt all trade with Colombia? Colombia exports around $1 billion of products to Israel, including coal, coffee, and flowers. That's a lot of money for a mid-sized Latin American economy. So I think that's definitely one of the reasons that it could hurt Colombia's economy, so he was forced to backtrack. But I think another very significant reason, which Nick mentions here, and I think he's right. I'm going to read from his article. There could be another more sinister reason for the Colombian government's dramatic climb down. Israel and or its senior partner in war crime, the US, threatened to create serious security problems in Colombia, which itself is trying to put behind it a 52-year civil war. And I should point out, some of these right-wing death squads are still active in Colombia. They're still killing land, they're still killing peasants to steal their land. They're still killing indigenous peoples to steal their land. So this article points out, Colombia is also home to dozens of U.S. military bases. And as the Mexican-Lebanese geopolitical
we sometimes forget how much of the world is militarily occupied by the United States.
The Israelis could organize a coup. They control Colombia's spyware and train its soldiers in paramilitaries. And by the way, the Colombian military is thoroughly right-wing and thoroughly infiltrated by U.S. intelligence forces. They were trained by the U.S. They were trained by Israel.
That strategy is everywhere.
To Petro. In fact,
train the military leadership, train the intelligence community. And then when things start to get out of hand, like you saw with Indonesia and you've seen time and time again, when things start to get out of hand and the leaders of these countries start talking about things like land reform or, expropriating wealth, social justice, nationalizing industries and resources, then you have your military establishment that's trained by the United States or with the help of Israel. You've got them for a military coup, and then you've got the CIA there to pump out a bunch of propaganda to justify that. Indonesia is the ultimate example of that strategy, but they've used this strategy time and time and time again. That's why these people like Petro right now have to be very careful. You can kind of understand why he kind of has to hedge or walk back his sentiment. He's the leader of a country that used to be a total U.S. puppet state. It's militarily occupied by the United States, and you've got a military establishment that's trained by Americans and Israelis. So you do have to watch what you're saying, or you're going to get IND'd. Another example of that exact strategy in Chile and Pinochet.
When Petro won the election, there were some military officers who refused to recognize his victory. They called him a terrorist publicly, and some of them even turned their back to the president. So clearly Petro, he is in a weak position, like, for instance, Evo Morales was in Bolivia. Evo Morales had this majority support of the Bolivian population, but he did not have the support of the Bolivian military, which carried out a coup against him, backed by the United States in 2019. So Petro is very concerned about the possibility of a military coup. And this brings us to what Nick Corbishley points out in his article, Naked Capitalism, which is the 2 Israeli mercenaries that Petro mentioned in his tweet, Yair Klein and Rafael Etan. They also were involved in Colombia in training these paramilitary groups and also these drug traffickers. And then Nick Corbishley quotes that BBC article, and this in the BBC wrote,
don't want to be ended because he was Jakarta. That's right. That's what the Jakarta method is all about. Absolutely.
Klein, who taught the Medellin cartel to operate remote-controlled bombs. So the Israeli military helped to train one of the most notorious drug cartels, or rather, let me say, a former, in scare quotes, former Israeli military officer, an intelligence officer, trained one of the most notorious Colombian drug cartels in history, the Medellin cartel. And furthermore, after giving military training to the militias of drug traffickers, Yair Klein, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Israeli army, went on to work with the landowners in Colombia who created the AUC death squads in order to fight against the leftist guerrillas of the FARC. And then there's that quote from the BBC in which this Israeli mercenary points out that he was ordered to go to Colombia by the United States. And furthermore, Nick points out in this article that the other Israeli official who was cited by Gustavo Petro in his tweet, Rafael Ten, he was the
this is all just one video. Yeah.
Former chief of Mossad, the Israeli CIA.
The West is comically evil. It's
just
absurd.
He was hired by Colombia's right-wing president, Virgilio Barco, in order to try to end the civil war against the left. And one of the recommendations of the former Mossad chief which was embraced by the right-wing Colombian regime, was to exterminate the political leaders of the Patriotic Union, a left-wing political party that emerged from a peace agreement with the FARC. And what followed is what was known as a politicide, a political genocide, in which the Colombian right-wing regime, backed by the US and by Israel, just massacred thousands of left-wing leaders in Colombia, basically murdering any prominent left-wing leader. And they killed 2 left-wing presidential candidates, 5 sitting left-wing congressmen, 11 deputies, 109 councilors, 8 current left-wing mayors, 8 former left-wing mayors, and thousands of other left-wing activists. I mean, even the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is an arm of the US-controlled Organization of American States, even they admitted that the Colombian right-wing regime killed more than 4,000 people, and that's a very conservative estimate. So during this moment, this very fragile moment in which Petro is not totally in control, Colombia's security ties with Israel are still very strong. As recently as 2021, the right-wing Ivan Duque
it's a good question, Demi
Dorco.
I wonder how long it'll stay volunteer as the empire collapses. They're constantly complaining about low recruitment. For sure. I mean, this is why they have to rely on proxy wars so much, right? It's partially a PR thing because it became very unpopular in the 70s to have all the news footage of American boys coming home in coffins. And also the fact that, and this is something I talk about often that I find super interesting, but the way that the whole U.S. military was on the verge of like open revolt in the 70s. That's why they had to turn away. They had to stop the draft. That's why they had to readjust their strategy and focus more on arming CIA backed and trained death squads and proxies rather than directly involving the U.S. military. For that exact reason. But yeah, they're always complaining about recruitment and like these proxy wars are not working out. I mean, that they're not working out in Ukraine. It's not going to work out in Taiwan. I don't really think it's going to work out here either. Like we might be seeing, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but we might be seeing like the beginning of the end of this project, this whole Israel project. Is the draft still technically a thing? I don't know. But man, exciting times. Scary times, but exciting times, isn't it? We're really seeing, like, it's really incredible right now. I don't think we should take that for granted. The shift that we're seeing right now, the geopolitical shift that we're living through right now, just in the last couple of days and weeks. And it seems like this whole the decline of the empire just gets accelerated with every big major event. Ukraine really accelerated the decline, and now it's accelerated even more exponentially. Crazy times.
Tried to implement neoliberal economic policies, including privatizing pensions.
The USA currently faces simultaneous economic, political, and military crises, and environmental as well. Let's throw that in there as well.
Eliminating healthcare, reducing the minimum wage, imposing taxes on foods. And in response to the mass protests, the Colombian security forces, which were trained by Israel, used Israeli weapons in order to massacre 48 protesters. So, as Nick points out in this article, for Colombia's military and police forces, Israel is a key ally. This is almost certainly one of the main reasons why Colombian President Gustavo Petro has chosen to tread carefully. So this is the final note to end on. It's kind of a sad note, but it's a realistic one. Many Global South leaders recognize that Israel is a fascistic genocidal regime, and they are condemning it and supporting Palestine. However, they in many cases have their hands tied because the US and also Israel can threaten them, as the US and Israel have done to many other forces, especially left-wing forces in Latin America and across, of course, West Asia, killing Palestinian leaders, Lebanese, Syrian leaders, Iranians. So it can be dangerous for leaders like Gustavo Petro to take these positions publicly. Yeah. But again, that's also why it's even more impressive and it's even more historic that leaders in countries that have historically been staunch US and Israeli allies are now speaking out so strongly and also pointing out
it is very much the Fourth
colonialist
Reich.
Policies
Alexandro.
Are very closely linked to the fascist genocidal policies of Nazi Germany. After all, as anti-colonialist intellectuals like famously Aimé Césaire pointed out in his book Discourse on Colonialism, what the Western colonial powers did in the colonies was exactly what the fascists did internally. That is to say, what the British colonialists did in India and in Southern Africa, what the French did in West Africa and Algeria, what the US did to the native peoples of the modern day United States and Canada as well, what those colonial powers did
all colonialism
to
all the way down
is exactly what the Nazis did inside Europe itself. It's exactly what Mussolini did inside Italy. Fascism is the application of colonialism internally. Fascism and colonialism are not just linked, they are part of the same political system. So that's why
the absurd thing people talk about, America, if you don't vote for the Democrats, America might become fascist. Can you imagine? Can you imagine America one day could become fascist? And ignoring all the ways that, if you're a white person in America, no, you probably don't notice that America's fascism, that America is fascist. If you're a person of color or indigenous person, it's a totally different experience that you're going through. Or if you're a person in the global south that's been victimized by this exact strategy, wherever you are. Whether you're Palestinian, whether you're Chilean, whether you're Indonesian or Vietnamese or Korean or Brazilian or Greek or wherever, you're fully aware of America's fascist tendencies. It's not some big mystery, some big possible thing that might be happening maybe sometime in the future, unless people vote for Democrats. It's just totally farcical. Everyone around the world recognizes the political characteristics of America and the West and what our values are. And I think that's the amazing thing about this moment. There's a lot of people that have bought this bullshit about the rules-based order and our commitment to human rights and democracy and all this stuff. Everyone can see right now, everyone, even in the empire and outside the empire, can see that it's complete bullshit. And I think that's the really interesting thing about this current moment.
Surprising to see that the neo-colonialist and imperialist governments of the West today in NATO, these capitalist countries,
yeah, it's exactly what they did to internally colonize the land, for sure.
Genocidal policies that are so reminiscent of Nazi Germany. That's what we see in these powerful statements from leaders, not only like Gustavo Petro, but many leaders of the Global South. They can clearly see that. On this note, I'm going to end. I'm Ben Norton. This is Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today for this long episode. Please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Please.
I just linked Ben's video and his channel. Please support Ben's content. Really, really valuable analysis and commentary that we lean on often over here. And that was really great stuff. Also, I'll just remind people again, because the last time I reminded people, didn't really make all that much of an impact, but please, if you can, support this content as well, the content that you're currently watching, TRRS. I must, as you know, make the little number go up every single day. That's the only way that I'm able to continue doing this program here on twitch.tv, which some people find valuable, for whatever reason. So if you can, please support TRRS by subscribing. It's $5 per month, or it's completely free of charge if you have an Amazon Prime account. You can transition that into a Twitch Prime sub, totally free, very helpful. You can gift subs or friend coin or tip or whatever. There's a number of different ways that you can support this content. But if you can, please support TRRS. I really, really appreciate it a lot. Again, it's the only way that I'm able to do this. I feel very fortunate that I'm able to do this show each and every day here. The only way that is possible is through the endless generosity of our community members and our chatters and viewers and listeners, and even our unsubbed lurkers, wherever you are out there, lurkers, even you. I even appreciate you as well. So if you can, though, please subscribe to TRRS. It's very helpful. And you know what happens when you do subscribe? We become friends. Did you know that? We become friends, and it's real.
Count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
It's real friendship as well. It's not parasocial. It's real. We become actual friends. That's the main thing that you're purchasing with that measly $5. Isn't it really that much to ask for friendship, for community, for connection? $5? Really? That's all? I know. It sounds crazy to me too. But that's just the kind of deals that we're offering over here. Human person, thank you for the gifted sub. Very kind of you. I appreciate it. We love our beautiful lurkers. Yes, we do. Rob will come over to your apartment and compliment on how nice the hardwood floors are. Even if it's just that like flooring that's not even hardwood, but it's just meant to look like that, I'll totally pretend that I don't notice.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Kijiji Genie, thank you for the gifted sub as well. So do we have any other takers? To subscribe to TRRS before I move on here? Can we hit double digits before I move on to the next segment? Is that possible? Freelance Communist brought me here using cool emotes in a comedy channel. That's actually really cool. That is actually very cool. I always love to hear about how people find their way over here. And I'm glad that you ended up here as well, Barbara. I can't remember how I got here. Well, that's okay. I'm happy to have you here as well. I'm happy that you're all here. I really am.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
I never did the dance as well as I did in that GIF. But thank you, Bleep Lord. Bleep Lord, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. That's very kind of you. Very, very kind of you. Thank you for that. And thank you, freelance communists. When you bring, as you know, in this community, when you bring other people into the community, that actually reflects on you as well. When you recruit members, if you recruit one or two new members, that instantly elevates you up into the friendship triangle system. It instantly elevates you towards that top tier. So, just something for people to keep in mind as well. If you want to talk to your friends or family members or people that you know, that's how that works. Organizations should really use this recruitment approach. I mean, it's the pyramid shape that makes it so effective. No, excuse me. What?
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
I was thinking ahead, Ms. Squatch, thank you so much for the 5 gifted subs. Look at that. And instantly, right? Like already an elite tier member of the Friendship Triangle. And I know that it's a triangle. Thank you, Ms. Squatch. I know that. I was just pivoting ahead to talk in my mind. I was talking about how pyramid schemes are so dangerous and something that any well-meaning person could get sucked into, and how we totally reject that here. Because Twitch is only 2-dimensional, triangle-shaped, friendship access, and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. As you all know, and obviously I know that as well. Always testing you. That's right. You never know. You never know when another test is going to come down. Are you pleased with your fantasy basketball team? Yeah, honestly, I think it's pretty good. I was just pleased that I didn't forget. I actually forgot briefly. At like 8:30, I was like, oh, I forgot again. I forgot for the second year in a row to draft. But then I remembered. I was quite happy. A lot of scoring on my team. Not as much in the way of defense or rebounding, but I'm hoping the scoring can really carry me. I want to keep our members sharp. That's exactly right, Crad Babes. Okay, so let's continue. One thing we really have to talk about is the interviews that have been given from some of these now hostages. These hostages that have been released from Hamas. And it's very, very interesting what they've been saying, to the point that like Netanyahu and the Israeli government are just like, we got to shut them up. We got to stop this. And American media is trying to spin it. They're trying to do the whole like, oh, they said it was hell, but like you can't really put this toothpaste back in the tube. Very, very interesting, these comments by these released hostages. And more, and I think we're going to got about another hour, like a little bit less. I'm going to try to get to everything, but more and more, it really does seem like the narrative that was promoted post October 7th about random indiscriminate massacres on the part of these like escapees from Gaza. At the very least, I always I find it tricky to talk about this because I don't want to sit here and deny that anything bad has happened. But at the very least, I think it should be clear now that there's way more to this story than what was originally put out there for us. At the very least, there's way more going on. And think about the ways that the violence and the indiscriminate slaughter that was described on October 7th has been used to not only justify the mass bombing and mass murder and ethnic cleansing of people in Gaza and like armed settler terrorist attacks on people in the West Bank and elsewhere, but as a way to delegitimize the entire like Palestinian justice movement, to frame it as, to try and scare people and frame it as being this pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist thing. This has been used as a kind of propaganda tool to completely delegitimize any of that, any kind of solidarity internationally, and to justify this horrific bombing campaign. And I think the amazing thing is, even before these stories started coming out, you already saw people just rejecting this narrative and refusing to be intimidated out of supporting Palestinians. I mean, that's amazing in and of itself, but more and more stories keep coming out, which at the very least, I think demand further investigation. I think it should not be controversial at this point to say that there is certainly way more to the story than what we were initially told, and that this wasn't just a case of a bunch of indiscriminate attacks on civilians, which it's being framed as. I mean, on the Insurgents podcast this week, we talked to Sana Saeed from AJ Plus, and we talked about this, about how everyone in Israel is given this veneer, is given this shield of like being a civilian. I think it's something really interesting that's happening, where like no one in Gaza is a civilian. No one. No, not women, not kids, not nurses, not journalists. None of them are civilians. And they have they're not civilians, and also they have zero right to defend themselves or to use violence in any way. Israel, on the other hand, has unlimited monopoly on violence, and everyone is a civilian, even people in the IDF, even armed settlers that are like carrying out terrorist attacks. They count as civilians too. So this whole thing about 1,300 civilians were just indiscriminately massacred. They've been very cagey about the details of that. What is the actual number of civilians in that tally? How many of those deaths were people that are in the IDF? Like, they've not been clear about that. All these conflicting stories of people coming from that rave, that music festival, survivors from these kibbutzes, released hostages, they're all telling a very different story about this. And I think we should listen to that. And we don't need to deny we don't have to deny that anything bad has happened, but I don't think it should be controversial to start asking some serious questions and start asking for a real investigation into this. From Haaretz numbers, most were soldiers. Like, it's really amazing how everyone gets painted with that brush of being a civilian. I pointed out in the Discord the other day that like insane post where they were just like, these 2 IDF soldiers were just filming TikTok dances in their military base, and then they're slaughtered indiscriminately. Like, it's really amazing how you can be a officer in this colonial army in a war at a military base, and you still get described in the propaganda as being some harmless TikTok dancing civilian. And yeah, I get that there's conscription in Israel. I think that's really fucked up. As we've said, I know it's not easy. I wouldn't want myself to be in that position. You can not serve in the IOF though. You can choose to go to jail over that. And many people do, including, to tie it back to the Taylor Swift thing, including that like Taylor Swift meme account. No, this is what I mean, Dummy Darko. All Israelis are civilians and all Palestinians are Hamas. That's the rhetoric. And you wonder why it's not landing with people. It's not connecting with people. People are totally rejecting it because it's patently absurd. It's just patently ridiculous to make this case. So, at the very least, we need to start asking some questions about what actually happened on October 7th. And we shouldn't have to keep pointing this out as well. Israel lies about everything. The people that took them that believe everything that they said right away. And I'm thinking about the people in left media, the people that are like, they call themselves socialists, that try to stand with Palestine, who, as soon as this thing happened, they'd had tweets saying like, celebrating, this is great, people are escaping from Gaza, I support Palestine. And then as soon as the horror stories started coming out, they said, oh, whoa, not like this. Better delete that tweet. I better apologize. I better equivocate. I better make sure that I condemn all the baddies, you know? Beheaded babies is not the kind of thing where I instantly believe that. I mean, and just the farcical thing about all that, and I'm not saying that it's all lies. I'm really not. But considering the long history of Israel lying about these things, I think it's worthwhile to take everything that they say about October 7th, about anything that they do in Gaza, with a huge grain of salt, or to just believe initially that they're lying and then try to work backwards from there. The whole thing about the babies is just absurd though, because of the number. Like, you can't claim to be if you can't claim to be scandalized by murdered and beheaded babies and then go and drop 6,000 more now, however many thousand bombs on Gaza, and killing thousands of kids, thousands of little children, and saying like, well, they're Hamas, they deserve it. I'm sorry, like, you can't claim some kind of moral high ground. They killed kids, and that's why we have now unlimited excuse, unlimited justification to kill thousands of kids. Yeah, and according to Haaretz, so far, zero babies, 0 kids. I don't know. I'm trying to find ways to talk about this productively. I'm trying to find ways to talk about this without going out of bounds or jeopardizing anything. I think at the very, very least, we got to start asking more questions about this, though. I was not politically active when the IDF claimed they didn't snipe that journalist, but it became quite clear that they were hiding something. I wasn't even paying attention. I think that's the thing that we're seeing right now. BR3. I don't totally know how to say her name. But people are just rejecting this. You know, people are rejecting the propaganda. People are just just not believing the lies. Yeah, even Haaretz is saying that. Yeah, regime pilled. Like, this is, you know, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about this, it should be obvious now that there's more going on with this story. And that the initial wave of propaganda that we were fed about this is not holding up to scrutiny. There's now it's not just one. It's not like some one random Telegram account. These are survivors of these kibbutzes. They're survivors from this the music festival. They're hostages that are being released by Hamas. All are telling very similar stories about how they were treated, about who was being aggressive, and how people were being killed in these like IDF crossfires. They're saying this to Israel state media. You know, multiple people now. It's not just one random case or repeating some random rumor that I heard or anything like that. It did work though. Most people are still swayed to the defense side. It depends on who. I mean, like Old Dutch, like you've seen the protests, like not only around the world, but like here in Canada, you're seeing thousands of people rejecting this. Look at the polling numbers. For the first time in my lifetime, people, like a majority of Americans who are being polled are saying, we don't want to arm Israel. We don't support this. That has not happened in our lifetime. Like for sure, there's still a lot of people that do believe it, but a lot of the people that do believe it are people that have platforms and make you feel like they're the majority when they're not. They're not the majority. We're the majority. Never lose sight of that, right? Never lose sight of it because you feel crazy and it's designed to make you feel crazy. Never lose sight of that. You know, we're in the majority here. The people that are against this like grotesque bombing campaign, the people that are standing with Palestine, we're the majority. Let's look at this clip. This is a Democracy Now! Video on what this freed hostage was saying today.
To go to something that just happened before the broadcast, and that is one of the hostages who was released speaking. Hamas has released 2 Israeli civilians held hostage in Gaza. On Monday, a Hamas spokesperson said 79-year-old Nurit Cooper and 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz had been let go for humanitarian reasons. Hamas shared video showing armed fighters releasing the
She dapped him up on the way out, too.
Officials just before the video ends, Yocheved Lifshitz reaches back to shake the hand of one of her captors, saying shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. Earlier today, Yocheved
gives her a little wave.
To reporters in Tel
up the
Aviv.
Volume.
She describes the scene where she was kidnapped. She was very critical of the Israeli government, saying that the Hamas had released fire balloons, as she described it, that the fields were burning for weeks before. She was taken on a motorbike with 2 Hamas fighters, then walked for miles through what she called a kind of spider web of underground tunnels. Once in Gaza, Yocheved Lifshitz says her treatment improved. Her daughter Sharon, who flew in from London for her release, translated her remarks to reporters.
My mom is talking about coming there. When they arrived into a large hall in which about 25 hostages were gathered. And after 2 or 3 hours, those hostages, 5 of them,
yeah, Marty, it is,
were taken into a separate room. My mom is saying that they were very friendly towards them and that they took care of them, that they were given the medicine.
You see that? You gotta just imagine the IDF guy off the camera being like freaking out. Like they do not, like this is a huge blow to their whole propaganda. Like they're freaking out about this, and they should be. Cut the mic.
They were given medicine, and they were treated. One of the men with them had a badly injured from a motorbike accident.
Yeah, Gigi Allen Dulles, a really interesting comparison, actually. It reminds me of the whole military captured by Korea that kicked off the whole brainwashing scare. It is like that, isn't it? No, there must be something going on here. There must be something else going on. There must be some like weird communist brainwashing technique that's been happening. Yeah, Pac-Man Trinity as well. Yeah. Just because Korea was talking to these soldiers, especially black soldiers, and being like, why are you killing Koreans? Your country hates you. Your country fucking hates you. Why are you out here killing Koreans? And a lot of soldiers were like, that's true, actually. That's kind of weird that we're doing that, isn't it? And the CIA was just like, oh my God, what is going on? They're using some kind of brain ray. They're giving them Havana syndrome. And someone said as well, like, I think Israel's getting ready to just bomb all these tunnels and getting rid of these hostages. I don't doubt that. And there's something I want to look at in connection with that kind of idea as well in a couple minutes.
Paramedic was
Like, I'm just using the classic brainwashing technique of bringing up some valid points. Exactly. Like whenever you look back at examples of Russian propaganda during the Cold War, it's all just saying factually true things about the United States of America. And people are like, this is very dangerous Russian propaganda technique. The Hannibal Doctrine. We're going to be talking about this in a couple minutes, Old Dutch. I don't want to get too conspiratorial about this stuff, but like, I think it's really worth looking at that.
He was given medicine and antibiotics, that the people were friendly, that they kept the place very clean.
We were very hurt by the fact that the IDF did not know where are the scapegoats. They've warned us 3 weeks prior with people who came to the road and burned fields, sent incendiary balloons to burn our fields, and the IDF did not address this seriously. Suddenly, on Saturday morning,
Seriously, Pac-Man.
quiet. There was a heavy bombardment of the communities, and with that, the masses infiltrated, blew up the expensive fence, opened the gates of the kibbutz and entered in their masses. It was extremely difficult. I keep having those images in my mind. He's asking, why did you shake the hand of the Hamas terrorist individual? They were gentle with us. Our needs were supplied.
אמא שלי אומרת שהם התייחסו אליהם בעדינות וסיפקו את כל הצרכים שלהם. My mom is saying that they treat them kindly and provided for them.
That was 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz being translated by her daughter Sharon. Yocheved's husband, Oded, is still a hostage. Last week, the legendary Israeli...
And apparently she said something like, I went through hell or whatever. And it's just like, in addition to talking about the ways that she was treated with kindness like that, but I don't doubt that it would not be a pleasant experience to be a hostage in this situation. But like, it's definitely painting a very different picture of what has been described to us over the last couple of weeks. Yeah, this was Diego, like, we're going to talk about this. I got about another 40 minutes. Can't remember who reported this. I'm searching, but freed hostages have described IDF firing with tanks at buildings where they knew they were both Hamas fighters and hostages. Apparently, Israel doesn't even want the hostages freed and would rather use their deaths as an excuse for continued atrocities. I think there's something to that. And when we'll look in this Hannibal Doctrine and what that is, I think that's maybe going to help that click into place a little bit more. I think it was in Electronic Intifada that they're reporting that.
Journalist Amira Haas talked about Oded Lifshitz on Democracy Now!
I have no idea how many of the hostages. Some of them I know their relatives. I know one of them who is 85 years old and a very brave journalist who in Oded Lifshitz, his name, I just realized it. He's 85. He was, in the 70s, he exposed the expulsion of Bedouins in the northern of Sinai. He exposed it in a series of articles. I know some people that are relatives of, as I said, of friends of mine.
So that's Amira Haas, the legendary Israeli journalist, talking about Oded Lifshitz. He is still a hostage. His wife, as you can see, Yocheved Lifshitz, was just released. Rami Khoury, I was watching CNN earlier this morning just as this press conference was happening, and the response right out of it, it was the host, Erin Burnett, who is in Israel right now, said clearly she's voicing Hamas talking points. And when Yocheved said that the doctors came every 2 or 3 days and gave them medicine, and if they didn't have the proper medicine, they would get some kind of replacement medicine, she said that proves that Hamas is hoarding medicine because the Palestinians don't have it.
They were eating the same food as the captors as well.
What she said, she is a peace activist in Israel who is one of the
props to Amy Goodman. Props to Amy Goodman for, again, we can criticize some of the coverage of Democracy Now! Or whatever, but like, at least Amy Goodman's an actual journalist. Seriously. Like, she's the only one even touching the mainstream in American media to actually do her job, you know? to actually be a journalist, especially on this issue. So we got to give props to Amy. As whatever we might find that we can criticize about Democracy Now's coverage, whatever, there's things, but like so far and away better than almost anybody, and has been doing it for a really long time as well. So I think we got to give Amy her flowers on this one.
Well, my response to her, but also to you, is first, don't watch CNN in the morning if you want news about the Middle East. That's bad for your health, it's bad for your mind, and it's bad for your intake of serious, accurate news and analysis. There are many other much better sources around the world. Mainstream American TV is a catastrophe in this respect. My reaction to the Yehuda, I think her name is.
Yocheved.
She represents two things to me, and I've spent my whole life in the U.S. and around the world interacting with very, very close Jewish friends who I've known all my life, and people in the Arab world and Europe and everywhere. And my reaction is that she represents probably the essence, I think, of what makes Judaism such a special religion. It's based on ethics, it's based on love, it's based on truth, it's based on respect for God. And it's based on the quest, as God told Moses to tell the Jews to tell the world. It's based on the pursuit of justice. Seek justice and only justice, Moses said.
Remember that image, too, that iconic image on the 7th, you know, when this started, of the like settler grandma holding an AK-47 with the Hamas guy, like together. What an amazing image. But it really does seem like that's kind of an example of like how this was, or what the intentions were anyways.
So that all echoes in what you said. She was honest. She was friendly. She said the truth, we assume. I don't think she was, orchestrated or taught to say any of these things. The fight that Hamas has, that
even the granny's tea in a power bar, people. Yeah.
It's with the Zionist movement, which became the State of Israel, which is widely recognized around the world as an apartheid system. The second thing I recognize about her comments is how the Israeli defense system in the south completely collapsed, was totally incompetent. And those towns, those settlements, the kibbutzim in the south, are mostly located on the ruins of Palestinian villages that were destroyed in 1947-48. There was about 500 Palestinian villages that the Jewish fighters, before the declaration of the State of Israel, from late 1947 to May 48, you had militant Jewish groups carrying out terrorism, pogroms, acts of great violence to get the Palestinians out, and it succeeded. About 750,000 Palestinians were driven out of Palestine before the declaration of statehood on May 15, 1948, Israeli statehood. And there was 500 villages, and they were destroyed, and people left, and many of them are where those kibbutzim are in the south. So I think that's another factor that we have to take into consideration, and it raises the question of, where do you make a distinction between ordinary Israelis, people in the reserve forces, people in the active military. The problem is our battle is with the Zionist movement and Israel, which has done what it has done to us, and we're resisting and fighting back. But even in the heat of battle, you get human, decency shown by both sides, because we are both humans and we are decent, but we are also in a state of active, violent warfare that's been going on for almost a century. About a century, because really the fighting in Palestine between Jews and Palestinians started around the late 1920s, is when 1929 was the big first clashes in Palestine, and ever since. So it's been almost a century that this war has been going on. So you can't analyze any of this stuff in isolation. You have to look at the deeper context, and at the same time, don't lose sight of the humanity of both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people.
And look, this is interesting too. Yeah, sorry, this is great. The scenes of horror, the horrifying scenes of these hostages.
Look at this grandmother being forced to hold a Hamas terrorist rifle as he takes a picture with her. This is inhumane. Inhumane.
Like if that I'm sorry. I hope this grandma is okay. Like I really do. She seems really cool. I mean, if that's what's inhumane, I would hate to see inhumane. Like if that's what's inhumane, that went nowhere. I'm sorry, but it's like, that's the amazing thing. You say this is inhumane when you show this image, and then look at some of the images of Gaza right now. That apparently is humane. That's our humane moral army. That is our humane moral army. What we're doing in Gaza. That's what we're seeing here. The inhumane. You gave a settler grandma an AK, and you're dapping her up in a picture. That's inhumane, but blowing up children is totally okay to do. Sure. No, that's really funny. This is interesting too, though. Look at this. This from this like Israeli state media thing. They're showing the Sky News coverage. It says each person had a guard watching him or her. They took care of all the needs. They talked about all kinds of things. They were very friendly. And then you have this Israeli state media thing saying factors involved in Israeli propaganda in recent days. The fact that Yocheved Lifshitz was allowed to make a statement live was a mistake. So they're like, what the fuck? What the hell? What are we doing? We care so much about these hostages, but when we give them a microphone and they get the release, that's really not good. We don't want that. You're laughing at Mima with it, throwing up deuces with an AK, and you're laughing. I really hope that she's okay. I really, really do. It is not certain that there was anyone who held a preliminary discussion on the subject and asked himself all the questions. In the picture, this is how Sky News covered her statement. So, like, Israeli propagandists are freaking out over this. They're like, this is a huge, like, they don't want hostages to be released and talking like this, which makes all the faux concern for these hostages in the first place, I think, kind of silly. Here's another one of these clips. This was someone that was at the rave that escaped to one of the kibbutz. I think it's a different one from what we looked at before. I'm pretty sure.
עכשיו איתנו יסמין מקיבוץ כברי. שלום לך יסמין.
שלום, בוקר טוב.
את היית באותה מסיבת טבע שהפכה למסיבת טבח.
נכון.
והיית אפילו בת ערובה במשך 2.5 בידי הטרוריסטים של חמאס.
נכון. אני אחרי המסיבה ברחתי יחד עם בן זוגי נקלענו לקיבוץ בארי לתפוס שם מחסה בשעה שאנחנו לא יודעים שיש חדירת מחבלים, בעצם אנחנו להתגונן מפני הקסאמים.
כן.
דפקנו בדלת אצל זוג ממש נחמד, משפחת דגן, הדס ועדי, שהכניסו אותנו לממד שלהם, שהיינו בממד איתם בין 6 ל-8 שעות, תחת פחד מאוד גדול, כי אנחנו יודעים שיש חדירה של כ-100 מחבלים בתוך הקיבוץ, והיריות בכל עבר, עד שאנחנו מגיעים לשלב שהזוג הזה מודיע לנו שהמחבלים ממש נמצאים בית לידינו, ושכנראה הם יגיעו אלינו, ובאמת לא עוברות 5 דקות וכל הבית מתנפץ לרסיסים, ואנחנו במשך שעה מצליחים
whole house shatters to pieces, she says.
ובמשך שעה דופקים 10 מחבלים בערך על הממד, צעקות בערבית. זה היה שעה מאוד מאוד מתוחה, והרגשנו בפחד שלא יתואר. ואחרי שעה הם מצליחים לפרוץ את הממד, ומוצאים אותנו, את 4תנו, לבית ליד, שכבר בו שהו 8 בני ערובה נוספים. אנחנו מצטרפים ל8 האלה, ואנחנו הופכים להיות בערך כ12 בני ערובה, עם 40 מחבלים. ששומרים עלינו. אני מקצרת לך את הסיפור.
הם מתעללים בכם?
הם לא מתעללים בנו. הם מתנהגים אלינו בצורה מאוד
They treat us very humanely.
אנושית?
כן, מה זה אומר אנושית? שומרים עלינו, הם נותנים לנו לשתות פה ושם, שהם רואים שאנחנו בלחץ, הם מרגיעים אותנו. הייתה תחושה מאוד מאוד מפחידה, אבל אף אחד לא
No one treated us violently.
למזלי, לא קרה לי מה שאני שומעת.
This is not like Hamas sympathizer.
נכון, אבל אחרי שעתיים, בקיצור, בהתחלה לא היה שום גורם ביטחוני איתנו. אנחנו אלה שהתקשרנו במשטרה יחד עם החוטפים, כי החוטפים רצו שהמשטרה תגיע, כי המטרה שלהם הייתה לחטוף אותנו לעזה, לא לרצוח אותנו. ואחרי שעתיים שאנחנו נמצאים שם עם החוטפים, מגיעה המשטרה, מתנהל קרב ירי שהמשטרה שלנו מתחילה אותו, קרב ירי מאוד מאוד קשה מבחינת כמות התחמושת שעברה שם, או לא בסיומה, במהלכה, אחד המחבלים החליט להיכנע, זה מחבל שיצר איתי קשר במהלך השעתיים.
I haven't heard much about this on the media either.
אלה ששמרו על הבני הערובה.
כן.
והוא מחליט להשתמש בי כמגן אנושי. הוא מחליט להיכנע, אני לא מודעת לזה באותם רגעים, זה בדיעבד. הוא מתחיל להתפשט, הוא קורא לי ומתחיל לצאת איתי מהבית תחת אש. אני צועקת בזמן הזה לימ"מ כשהם יכולים לשמוע אותי.
Okay, I think this is the part we heard before. I just hadn't seen the extended remarks.
אני רואה על הדשא של בגינה של האנשים מהקיבוץ שיש 5 בני ערובה ששוכבים או 6 על האדמה בחוץ, ממש כצאן לטבח מול הירי של הימ"מ שלנו והמחבלים.
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא, הם נהרגו מהחילופי ירי, תבין שהיה חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שזה כוחותינו ירו בהם? כשניסו לחסל את החוטפים, את החמאס.
הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל בני ערובה. כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד
מאוד קשים. They eliminated everyone, including the hostages.
אני משוחררת בסביבות השעה 5:30, ב8:30 כנראה מסתיימת הלחימה, אחרי שהיה חילופי אש מטורפים.
This is on Israeli state media. This is not me promoting some kind of conspiracy theory here. This is one of the survivors from this indiscriminate violence that we were told about.
איך כולם נהרגו?
מהחילופי אש.
מהחילופי אש, כלומר יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן?
וככה אני מאמינה.
אוי, זה נשמע כל כך רע.
כן, וכולם מתו.
ואת בזכות אותו מחבל שהחליט להסגיר את עצמו.
בדיוק.
ואת ניצלת וכל היתר נהרגו שם.
חוץ מעוד בחורה אחת שניצלה, מצאו אותה אחרי מי שטיפל שם באירוע, אחרי זה אולי זה בתקל או משהו כזה, מצאו אותה שהרימה ראש בין כל הגופות, ואז פשוט...
ובן הזוג שלך שהיה איתך?
נהרג.
הוא גם נהרג.
כן, כולם נהרגו שם.
חזרת לקברי? חזרת לקברי?
חזרתי לקברי, ואז גם שם התחיל בלגן.
מהצפון?
כן, אז עכשיו אני מתארחת, מארחים אותי בצורה מקסימה בקיבוץ עין חרוד, ואני פה בינתיים.
את בעמק עכשיו. טוב, יסמין, זו חוויה איומה שעברת.
נכון.
איבדת את בן זוגך, ראית אנשים נהרגים על ידך.
מה
קרה לאותו מחבל שהסגיר את עצמו?
הוא עדיין עצור, ובדיוק אני מוזמנת לחקירה כדי לעזור, שהוא ייכנס לכלא להרבה שנים, ונהרגו לי לצערי עוד עשרות חברים.
עשרות חברים?
כן, כי זה קהילה טרנס סצנה כזאת, ואנחנו יוצאים לאותן מסיבות, זה אומר שחוץ מהבן זוג שלי הכרתי שם עוד עשרות ומאות חברים, ואני כל יום מגלה שמתו לי לפחות 10 חברים, אז ככה שאני כבר בכלל לא יודעת להקל את הסיטואציה הזאת.
קשה מאוד להקל, כי דבר שלא קרה אף פעם.
נכון, ממש.
כל טוב לך, יסמין.
תודה רבה.
תחזיקי מעמד.
תודה,
אחרי כל מה שעברת.
תודה רבה. ביי ביי.
So again, it's not just, we're not just taking Hamas's word here for anyone that wants to freak out about this. Like, we're listening to the people that survived these kibbutzes. We're listening to the words that are being used by hostages that are being released. And it runs totally contrary from the narrative that we're being told. And again, I will say once again, just in case anyone's confused about this is not me saying that like nothing bad happened, everything Hamas did was great, no innocents died. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying though is that there's something way more going on with this story than the narrative about random indiscriminate violence that we were told from moment one. And look at all the stuff that's been debunked already, like the roving rape gangs dragging women through the street. Like that was a total lie. The babies, and now we're getting words from these survivors from these attacks and are telling and released hostages and are giving a totally different story from what was initially reported. They broke out of their concentration camp to take hostage to negotiate the freedom of thousands of wrongly imprisoned Palestinians. I'm tired of everyone calling these people bloodthirsty animals. And you know what? And again, like, if we can look at actual incidents where Israeli civilians or unarmed people were killed, again, when people want me to denounce that, I denounce the people that erected the concentration camp gates to begin with. That's who I denounce in those moments. Whatever violence happened, if it's not being directly coming from the IDF, it's coming from the institution of apartheid and settler colonialism and the people that erected these concentration camps in the first place. That's where that violence is coming from. And in some cases, it's coming directly from them. And in some cases, they're creating the situations where that kind of violence can happen. So they bombed the house that the hostages in it. I mean, that seems, or was hit with a tank shell. I mean, that kind of seems to be like what she's describing there, for sure. And here's this other piece, and I got to go in about 10 minutes. So I got to go pretty soon. This Mondo Weiss article that says many details of what transpired on October 7th continue to be shrouded in mystery, including how the 1,400 Israelis who died that day were killed. A growing number of reports indicate the Israeli military is responsible for some of those deaths. Some reports are beginning to appear. This came out a couple days ago. Some reports are before these hostages were released. Some reports are beginning to appear, including the documentation of the killing of Israelis by Palestinian fighters. There are a growing number of reports that indicate the IDF was also responsible for Israeli civilian and military deaths on October 7th and the days after. Testimony from Kibbutz Be'eri would seem to indicate that many Israeli captives were still alive on Monday, October 9th, a full 2 days after the events of Saturday, October 7th. While it might be understandable if captives were killed in hectic crossfire of an initial Israeli response to the attack on the 7th, this account would seem to indicate that the decision to assault the kibbutz and everyone inside was made as a clear military calculation. There are implications for the next stage of the war, which might even be bloodier. One central element of the conflict is now the fate of more than 200 Israeli captives, soldiers, and civilians. And yeah, like we were saying, look from the perspective of the Israeli government, the IDF, like, do you want those hostages to be released if they're going to be saying anything similar? And if you think it's somehow out of bounds to suggest that they would rather have those people die than to be released and talk, and they would rather just continue to use their deaths as a kind of propaganda technique to whitewash their own like mass murder, that's why we need to look at this before we go. The Hannibal Directive, which is not something that I had ever heard of, but I think is probably worth taking a look at in this context. The Hannibal Directive is a controversial procedure used by Israeli defense forces to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces. It was introduced in 1986 after a number of abductions of IDF soldiers in Lebanon and the subsequent controversial prisoner exchanges. The full text of the directive has never been published, and until 2003, Israeli military censorship even forbade any discussion of the subject in the press. The directive has been changed several times. At one time, the formulation was that the kidnapping must be stopped by all means, even at the price of striking and harming our own forces. Let me just repeat that. Let me just repeat that one more time, in case you didn't quite get that. The kidnapping must be stopped by all means, even at the price of striking and harming our own forces. The Hannibal Directive has, at times, apparently existed in two different versions, one top-secret written version, accessible only to the upper echelon of the IDF, and one oral law version for division commanders and lower levels. In the later versions, by all means was often interpreted literally, as in an IDF soldier was better dead than abducted. In 2011, the IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz stated the directive does not permit killing IDF soldiers. Well, if the head of the IDF said so, then obviously they're always very honest. So I think we can put to rest any conspiracy theories around that. If the head of the IDF said so. Kind of interesting, though, in that context, isn't it? The kidnapping must be stopped by all means, even at the price of striking and harming our own forces. Kind of interesting, isn't it? And again, my whole point of talking about this, the whole point of this segment is not to deny that any bad things happened, or that every single person that was killed by the IDF or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I don't believe that, and I'm not saying that. But what I do believe, though, is that there's more to this story of what happened on October 7th than what the official narrative was in those opening days. And look at the ways that that narrative about random indiscriminate killings at a music festival or these kibbutzes, or roving rape gangs, beheaded babies, all this stuff. Look how all of that has been used to justify this like horrendous, horrific, barbaric bombing campaign, this mass murder campaign. Over 2,000 children have been killed since October 7th using these kind of justifications. Look at what survivors of these kibbutzes are saying. Look at what these released hostages are saying. At the very least, it should be clear now that there's more going on, and that the narrative that we were fed starting on the 7th is not accurate. Is it controversial to say that? Is it really? I don't think so. I don't think it should be. Yeah, that human person just shared another article from Mondo Weiss, which I think is worth looking at. I am running out of time, so I don't think we can take a look at it today, but I think talking about everything, I think I kind of covered everything that I wanted to talk about today in this segment. One final push, if you don't mind, folks. I got to go in about 5 minutes to pick up my kid from school. I am a mere 19 subs away from the goal. A mere 19 subs away from the goal. So if you can, folks, please subscribe to TRRS. Please help me make my little number go up. The only way that I'm able to do this commentary, and if you find this community valuable, if you find this this show helpful in order to understand this and other major events, the only way that I'm able to continue to do it is if people subscribe to the channel and support the work that I do on here. So if you can, please subscribe to TRRS. It's $5 per month. It's completely free with an Amazon Prime account. It really helps me a lot, and we become friends. What do you think about that? Can we get to the goal? Can we get to the sub goal? A mere 19 subs away. A mere measly 19 subs away.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Dude Zoot, thank you. That Dude Zoot. Very first gifted sub in the channel from That Dude Zoot. I really appreciate that. That Dude Zoot. That's very kind of you. Also, poor little Johnny the chimney sweep. We'll get to eat this winter. I haven't done the Victorian chimney sweep bit in a little while, have I?
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
That was a classic. I don't want to lean on it too much. Comrade Bushy, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Comrade Bushy, always bailing me out when I need help. Comrade Bushy is always there to bail me out. Thank you, Comrade Bushy. I really appreciate it. Very, very, very kind of you. I haven't stopped listening to Eye in the Sky since Submania last week. It's just such a good song. It's really just one of the best songs. And it's a very good karaoke song for me. It's right in my register. The chorus is a little tricky, but my trick is that I sing the lower harmony in the chorus when I get to the chorus. That's how I get through that. That was a highlight. What a stream that was. So folks, we're a mere 13 subs away. Right? That's the number. I think. I'm pretty sure. It's something like that. A mere 13 subs away, folks. Are there any other brave heroes that want to support this channel? Before I have to go, you are always here to help, Comrade Bushy, and I appreciate it.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Sunny Sola, thank you for the 3 gifted subs. I really appreciate all the support, Sunny Sola.
You can
Thank you
count
for
on
that.
me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
And thank you, Fonzonzons, aka Sam. And thank you for contacting me about going to the protest. I was happy that we were able to do that, Sam. I mentioned it on the day, but it's really good to have someone to go to those things with.
You're going to have good
and I was really happy that we did that.
Talk you through all this.
And it was nice to meet you IRL. Anon, thank you for the 5 gifted subs.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Anon. The most Christ-like.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
The most Christ-like of all sub-gifters, our beautiful Anon gifters. And thanks Clobocop as well.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Clobocop, thank you for the gifted sub also. 3 away, folks. 3 more to go.
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
3 subs away from the goal. Can we do it? Can we do it? And we got a hype train going on as well. So now you can also get exclusive hype train emotes. Doesn't that sound nice?
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Dr. Maggot, thank you for the gifted sub. Thanks for all the support lately, Dr. Maggot, as well. My personal physician.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
My personal physician, Dr. Maggot. Shanovision says, thanks for the stream. Thank you, Shanovision, for the 100 friend coin. That's very kind of you. Shanovision, also an unsubbed viewer, looking for a stray gifted sub, has managed to avoid all the stray subs.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Sunny Sola, thank you for the gifted sub. And Barbara Loden, thank you for the gifted sub as well.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you. And thank you, Sam, for the 89 bits as well. Thank you, folks. We made the sub goal. That's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. I really, really appreciate all the support today and yesterday and last week and last month and last year and every single day from all of you folks. Thank you. So we did get to the sub goal, but of course, if people want to still subscribe, you can, if you want. There is a hype train, so if people want to subscribe, you're more than welcome to. Do not subscribe. We've hit the quota. Listen, I'm not going to tell people what to do. The last thing I'm going to do is tell people what they can and can't do. You know? If people want to subscribe, I'm not going to sit there and tell them not to. You know, that wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right for me to do that. It would be authoritarian if you tell people to subscribe. No, I don't think that's authoritarian. I think it's authoritarian to tell them not to. You know, because when you tell people to do something, it's like cool and nice and encouraging. When you tell them not to, it's like, what is this, 1984? Where are we? Where are we right now? Is this fucking Germany? In the 1930s? I don't know. You know? Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Okay. What are we doing here? I have a I still kind of like Midwestern marks. I don't know. Is that a problematic view? Would it be problematic if I gave the raid to Midwestern marks? They're defeating Israeli propaganda right now. Should I not do that? I still believe in Eddie. I don't know. I still do. I think they've made mistakes, and I've called them out. I criticized them during the whole that guy, that whole thing with that guy and that song. Okay, that's a good idea actually. Sean Vids. Let's do that. Sean Vids is raising money for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Let's go ahead and do that. That sounds like a great idea. You're not immune to propaganda in the Roosh orgs. I'm just trying to I don't know what I'm trying to do. I don't know. I'm trying to unite the left, folks. I'm trying to build bridges, okay? Stop it. Get help. I still think Eddie does good analysis sometimes of imperialism and foreign policy. I still believe in Eddie. His Oliver Anthony thing was weird, and I let him know that it was weird. But anyway, the chat has spoken. This isn't a democracy, it's actually an authoritarian dictatorship, but because I'm kind and benevolent to my wonderful, beautiful chatters, I also listen to what they have to say. And I'm going to listen to this time as well. Please give Sean my regards. You know, it's a really worthy cause. Sean's trying to raise money for the Palestinian Children Relief Funds. I hope it's a big success. Thanks everyone for watching. I really appreciate all the support. Seriously, I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, free Palestine.